I want to welcome you to the QER public meeting number 7. We are very pleased to be here in Denver to discuss the issue of the electric natural gas interdependencies and related issues. My name's Peggy Welsh. I'm with Energetics Incorporated. We are a contractor to the Department of Energy, and it's my honor today to be the meeting facilitator. We have an amazing group of distinguished speakers today, and we start today with a very distinguished panel of VIPs. Before we get into that, I have a few housekeeping notes. One of the things that we want to talk about is why we are, what is the purpose of today's meeting. And so I have a little statement that I'd like to read. Pursuant to the Federal Advisory Committee Act, the purpose of today's meeting is to ask for your individual input or your organization's input regarding electricity, natural gas interdependencies, and to provide a forum for information exchange. To that end, it would be most helpful to us for you to provide these recommendations and information based on your personal experience, your individual advice, information, and facts regarding this topic. The object of today's meeting is not to obtain any group position or consensus. Rather, the U.S. Department of Energy and the White House are seeking as many recommendations as possible from all individuals at this meeting. So we want to hear from all of you. Let me remind people that we are also live streaming this meeting. Welcome to those of you who are watching via live stream. We also want to hear from as many people who made the trip to attend in person. If you'd like to speak, you need to sign in at the front desk. If you don't want to speak, and some people are timid about doing that, we really encourage everyone to submit comments. Every single set of comments is reviewed extensively and considered as part of this process. And that address for submitting comments is QERcomments@hq.doe.gov. The Department of Energy is serving as the secretariat to the QER task force, and so they are the ones receiving the comments. With that, let me turn and introduce to you Dr. Karen Wayland, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis for state, local, and tribal cooperation. She is leading this effort to receive input from all stakeholders. Karen?
Thank you very much, Peggy. And thank you all for coming here. I know that this is not a regular part of your day job, and many of you traveled quite a distance to come here. I want to assure you how important the stakeholder meetings are here. In fact, in the presidential memorandum directing the administration to conduct the Quadrennial Energy Review, there's actually a couple paragraphs talking about this stakeholder engagement process. It is quite significant and important to both our analyses and the recommendations. To that end, as Peggy mentioned, we are live streaming and recording. We have a court reporter here so that we'll have transcripts and we'll also have meeting summaries. Those all get posted on the web, so for a sake of transparency, the public knows who we've been listening to and talking to, but also we'll be using that information in our analyses and recommendations. And I can assure you that each one of these meetings, we've had 7 so far, we've learned something new. In fact, even the secretary has sat through some of the panels and walked away saying, boy, that was a great panel. And once again, we have fabulous panelists that have come together to help us figure out what the crux of the issues are, and energy transmission, storage, and distribution. As Peggy mentioned, we have a website and a comment email. The website is www.energy.gov/QER. All of the statements of the panelists, the transcripts, the meeting summaries, and presentations will be posted there either directly after the meeting or within the next few weeks. We have 5 more meetings scheduled actually, although there will be more following. We've got one in Chicago and one in Bismarck. Both of those will be on August 8th. We've got one in Santa Fe on state, local, tribal issues on the 11th. We have one in Cheyenne, Wyoming on infrastructure siting on August 21st. And we have a new one scheduled that will be September 8th, looking at electricity issues with an Eastern focus. It's my pleasure now to introduce the panelists. The first speaker will be the Special Assistant to the President for Energy and Climate, Dan Utek. And it is a really special pleasure for me to be able to say that since we were Senate staffers together years ago. He was with the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and then for 5 years as a staffer for Senator, I almost said Secretary, but back then Senator Clinton. He was a special advisor to Secretary Chu and then went over to the White House and has now become the Special Assistant to the President. So it is with great pleasure and honor that I get to introduce Dan Utek.
Thanks, Karen. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here this morning with Karen, with Commissioner Patton, and others. Really thank everyone for both the panelists and also members of the public that came to provide input today. I think, as Karen said, this is a really important part of the process that we're going through to develop some recommendations in this space under the QER, and so thank you very much for being here. Before we dive into the QER, I want to step back a little bit and look at the big picture from the administration's perspective. President Obama has been committed to an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and one that aims to develop a diverse portfolio of American-made energy. And I think if you look at the last 5 years alone, our energy landscape has transformed in some remarkable ways thanks to efforts at the federal, state, and local level, and also investment by the private sector. So I'm just going to hit a few highlights. First is that U.S. crude oil production averaged 7.4 million barrels per day in 2013. That's up from 5 in 2008. The upward trend has continued this year. In April of 2014, production reached 8.4 million barrels per day, the highest level in nearly 20 years. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, we produce more of our oil here at home than we buy from other countries. Along with oil production, gas production has boomed, and I'll come back to that, but the U.S. is now the top gas producer in the world. We were, when Karen and I were working together up on the Hill, everyone was frantically figuring out whether we could site enough LNG import terminals to satisfy the natural gas demands of the U.S., and now we're looking at exporting some gas along with the many other uses that we're making of that resource. Renewable energy is getting cheaper, and deployment and generation are up sharply. Colorado is a huge leader in this area, but since 2008, the price of solar panels has fallen by 75%, and solar installations have increased by a factor of 13 in that time frame. We've seen some of the biggest utility scale projects come online, solar projects, and in addition, wind generation has more than tripled in the last 5 years. So we're seeing remarkable progress in renewables as well. We're making good progress in efficiency, and the transportation specifically. We're seeing declining gasoline demand, in part due to the historic fuel economy standards that were set during the first term, which essentially will double the fuel economy of the light-duty vehicle fleet, cars and light trucks, between 2012 and 2025. And that'll it'll cut 6 billion tons of carbon pollution, cut oil consumption by 12 billion barrels of oil, and save consumers about $1.7 trillion at the pump over the lifetime of that program. In addition, we've seen the construction of the first new nuclear plants in decades, historic investments in carbon capture technology, and record production of biofuels. So when you put it all together, these trends mean more affordable energy, more jobs in energy, and very importantly, less pollution from the energy sector. In 2013, carbon dioxide emissions from energy sources were 11% lower than in 2007. So the president's goal is to go further than that. He set a goal in 2009 of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 17% below 2005 levels by 2020. And last June released a roadmap, the Climate Action Plan, that outlines a series of steps to take us from where we are today, which is partway towards that goal, all the way to that goal and beyond. One of the things that, so I'm going to talk about 2 key initiatives. The second is the QER. The first is the power plant rules that EPA put forward on June 2nd, and that there will be public hearings on here in Denver starting tomorrow. This is the Clean Power Plan that EPA put forward. This is a proposal for first time to set carbon standards that apply to the existing power generation fleet. And this will have enormous benefits. By 2030, it will reduce nationwide carbon emissions from the power sector by about 30% from 2005 levels, and will include significant cuts by 2020 as well. The proposal will also cut hundreds of thousands of tons of harmful particle pollution, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides as a co-benefit. This will provide important health protections to the most vulnerable, such as children and older Americans, and by EPA's estimate, this will lead to health and climate benefits worth an estimated $55 to $93 billion in 2030. So this is a huge opportunity for all of us to move to cleaner power while continuing to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electricity. To realize those benefits, the plan will need to work on the ground, and that's why EPA conducted extensive outreach before putting out the proposal, and that's why they're going around the country, as they are here in Denver tomorrow, to gather additional input. So we think it's a really strong proposal, one that achieves the core objectives of reducing carbon pollution while maintaining reliable, affordable electricity and fuel diversity. And I think it's going to be an important driver for innovation and investment in the clean energy space, providing a long-term incentive, a long-term signal that the private sector needs to make commitments. So with that, I want to pivot to the Quadrennial Energy Review, and I think one of the inspirations for this project is the fact that all of the rapid change that I talked about in the energy space is presenting huge benefits. It's also presenting some challenges. You know, our current energy infrastructure is increasingly challenged by transformations in energy supply, markets, patterns of end use, issues of aging and capacity, impacts of climate change, and cyber and physical threats. So this first Quadrennial Energy Review, we hope will help to serve as a roadmap to address these challenges. But we are starting by going out, and as was mentioned, we've done 7 of these sessions. We're also doing collecting input through a whole variety of other ways to hear from public, from experts about how to get at some of these challenges. So that's taken us from New England to discuss gas supply issues, to Louisiana to discuss oil transport infrastructure, and today we're here in Denver to talk about the gas-electricity interdependence. So I just want to offer a couple of thoughts to frame up this conversation. The first is that the natural gas and electricity networks in this country are essential to our economic vitality and our way of life. Natural gas is used directly in our homes, businesses, and in industry, and in power plants to generate electricity. In the power sector, gas was used to generate 12% of electricity in 1990. In 2013, that number was up to 27%, and it's expected to continue to grow. There are a number of drivers for that. For example, gas complements renewable energy, and a number of states like Colorado have moved forward with regional or state renewable requirements or carbon emission targets. But the biggest driver is the rapid increase in shale production that I referred to at the start. As I mentioned, today the U.S. is the largest gas producer in the world. The Marcellus Shale, Pennsylvania, and other areas in the East Coast have gone from virtually nothing to being today, they would rank as the 7th largest producer in the world if that Marcellus region were a country. So huge changes in that space, and we expect, and our Energy Information Administration projects continued growth in production in the coming years, about a 50% increase between now and 2040. So this rapid increase in production has changed the locations of supply, necessitating investments in new pipelines and processing facilities. The market's responded. We have a system that works well in many places. Between 2003 and 2013, more than 12,000 miles of pipeline was built, adding more than 86 BCF per day of pipeline capacity. But in some regions, the combination of changing demand, both absolute demand for gas across industry and power generation, and the increasing demand for natural gas in the power sector, combined with the changing supply geography, has resulted in some regional constraints, most notably in the Northeast, but also in some other places. Beyond these regional constraints, we know that additional capacity will be needed. The INGA Foundation recently estimated that between now and 2035, more than $300 billion of additional midstream infrastructure will need to be added. So with all of these factors as a backdrop, the growing interdependence of our gas and electricity systems is the focus of today's meeting, and I think it's a really important topic to discuss. We know that utilities, pipeline operators, regulators, and policymakers at the state and federal level are looking at ways to strengthen the reliability and resilience of our energy infrastructure. We look forward to learning more about planning studies that are underway, efforts to establish better processes for gas-electric coordination, what role the federal government can play in helping to harmonize markets and operating procedures between the gas and electricity sectors, with all of that taking into account the circumstances of different regions as well as different users of natural gas. So in closing, I want to return to where I started. We're going through a time of rapid change in the energy landscape. That's hugely positive in many ways, but also presents some challenges such as the one that we're here to talk to you about today. I'm confident that by working together, we can take advantage of these opportunities presented by those changes, meet our shared objectives, and evolve our energy landscape towards a better system. So I look forward to a terrific discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Now it's my privilege to introduce Commissioner Pam Patton, a fellow sheep farmer, who has a quite storied career after her time raising sheep, which I'd love to talk to you about because I'm sure your experience in Colorado was a little different than a puny little New England sheep farm. But after that, she spent 20 years as an intelligence officer in the Navy, came back to Colorado, and was appointed recently by Governor Hickenlooper to the Colorado Public Utilities Commission for a 4-year term. She was on the La Plata Electric Association Board of Directors for 12 years. She's a credentialed co-op director and has a co-op board leadership certificate from the NRECA. And she served on many boards around electricity and power, and also active in a number of civil society. She was awarded the Barbara Conrad Leadership Award and the Morley Ballantine Award for Business Leadership. So we're quite honored and privileged to hear from her this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Karen. We will be talking about sheep, and that's very interesting. Good morning, everyone. I was really pleased to hear Dan's remarks first because it's going to allow me to shorten up some, and they were outstanding. Colorado is very pleased to play host to this forum on this critical subject of gas-electricity interdependence, safety and reliability being mission number one for everyone in both industries and all of the regulatory commissions. I would really like to commend DOE for the approach that they are taking with this Quadrennial Energy Review. And I will tell you at the outset that I didn't understand it was going to be as complex and effective, I believe. That could be. When Secretary Muniz was out here for the dedication of the ESIF at NREL, he discussed it, and then you guys sent Jonathan Pershing on the road, at least in Colorado, to talk with a lot of people in the industry about it, and we began to see that this was not just going to be a book on a shelf. But I don't think it was until we got into the public feedback and the stakeholder issue meetings that we began to realize what the extent of these issues are. And as everyone has said here, this is the 7th, and there are more to come. I was really pleased to see that you're adding another one even on the East Coast, because I am particularly pleased, and we're particularly pleased in Colorado, that there's quite a lot of Western emphasis leaving here, Bismarck, North Dakota, Santa Fe, Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's really impressive to see the Department of Energy out here in the West. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming to this state, this particular state, as Dan mentioned, is a good place to talk about energy, because just like the president, this state is interested in all of the above energy production, and we have it. We are 7th overall in the United States for energy production. We are 6th for natural gas, and it's hard to stay up there at 6, but we're doing it. And 9th for crude oil. And we're not here today to talk about Colorado, I understand that, but we're also in the top 10 for wind production. And I could keep going on the renewable side as well. I'm looking out at Public Service Company CEO David Eves. I think he'll be talking a little bit more about that, but he may mention a time in which 60% of Xcel's energy needs in Colorado were taken care of by wind. This didn't last for too long, but it's an impressive number. We also have 10 of the nation's top 100 natural gas fields, and that counts even with the Marcellus playing in there, although you notice we had to go down to 100 now to get to get our 10 in. And the industry here in Colorado has created 35,000 new jobs in the last 10 years. So a very, very significant industry for us. And as has already been mentioned, we see ourselves, and we are leaders in addressing the environmental impacts of the electricity sector in Colorado, starting back in 2004 when Colorado's voters and then legislature adopted the very first in the nation renewable portfolio standard. And that standard has continued to become more robust over the years. But I think it's in 2010 the activity that took place here that's perhaps most germane to what's going on today, and that was a bipartisan effort that started with industry, the gas industry, the electricity industry, the environmental community, working together to decide what to do about the aging coal fleet and ozone and issues and pollution issues here on the Front Range. And that eventually resulted in a bipartisan effort in the state legislature called the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act that closed out 900 megawatt production of coal and created some very, very serious fuel switching to natural gas here. I think, David, you're probably going to talk specifically to that in your panel. So a pretty impressive effort. And over on the rest of the environmental side, because of our oil and gas production, we really understand the environmental impacts of oil and gas here as well. And last year, Colorado became the first state in the nation to work with the industry and with the environmental community to come together on the first ever rules for methane emissions in oil and gas production here in the state. It's working for us, and it's going to work for the nation. So while I just said that the Department of Energy picked the right place to come to talk about this topic, I'm not so sure that that's true when it comes to regional gas and electricity interdependence, at least for the state of Colorado. Our natural gas production increased 38% between 2007 and 2012. And even though we heat 3/4 of our homes across the state with natural gas, and as you know, we use natural gas in our industries here as well for our increasing electricity and for integrating renewables, we just simply don't see the significant problems that are seen elsewhere regionally. And in fact, we of course have the eastern terminus of the Rocky Mountain Express interstate gas pipeline here, which when it was originally termed, I think they called it the Shale to Shining Shale project, and now we will see how that, what direction that pipeline ends up going. But it's interesting to me that, so we're just a little tiny piece of the WEC, but the WEC is working very diligently on gas electricity interdependence, and it was just over the weekend, kind of hot off the PDF press, came the executive summary for the second phase of a DOE-sponsored study on gas electricity interdependence. It's excellent, and they've narrowed it down at this point, I think, to 6 case studies. And only one of those case studies is in effect on the Front Range of Colorado, and I haven't had an opportunity to read that yet. I'm looking back, I think it's Wednesday, but I think we'll be hearing more about that soon along. So, and it's a very big pleasure for me to be sitting next door right here to Dan Utek personally, because the last time I saw him was by video teleconference, when he had to video teleconference with the regulatory utility commissioners in Dallas. Could not get away from Washington that day, so we got to see him on the big screen instead. And I think we're very, very fortunate that he came to Denver. So here we are in Denver. This is a typical, beautiful day in the Rocky Mountains. This is the way it always is here in the summer, and it's frequently like this in the winter. But at that same conference, when I saw you on the big screen, I got to see and hear and listen to FERC Commissioner Tony Clark in person talking about these regional gas electricity interdependency issues. It was an enlightening day. I think everybody in this room knows, but perhaps not all of the students who are watching. I know we have at least some students on the Auraria campus watching. The FERC Commissioner, Tony Clark, is from North Dakota. And North Dakota, like Colorado, has a real understanding of the perspective of the needs for natural gas and electricity in the winter. And we don't call it all polar vortices out here. We call it winter, and we are prepared for winter. But what we would say for everyone across the United States, and I don't want to tell you that I watched the Game of Thrones, but winter is coming, and we're all going to need to be ready. This is not a trivial topic today, and so I look forward to spending the rest of the morning learning with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before I turn this back over to Peggy to run the show for the rest of the morning, I do want to acknowledge 2 people who are in the audience today. We have a staff member from Congressman Tipton's office, and I'm not sure if there are any other congressional staff here. We thank you very much. Are you with? Great. Thank you very much both for coming, and Congressman DeGette. Wonderful. Another one in the back? Congressman Perlmutter. And Senator Bennett. Great. Thank you very much for coming.
I think it's an election year, too.
Yeah, I think we got them all. All right, and then I wanted to also introduce, I don't have to introduce Alice Madden. I just have to point out Alice Madden, who is the daughter of Colorado, but now on loan to us at the Department of Energy, working on state and local issues from the as the principal deputy assistant secretary in intergovernmental. So thank you, Alice, for coming. She did come out here, probably not just to see her family, but on business to sit here. So thank you. And I will turn this back to Peggy.
Thank you. Well, I think that we have the opportunity to learn greatly from Mr. Utek and Commissioner Patton, and I want to thank you both for sharing your time with us today. We are not going to take questions at this point because we've got a very full day, so please join me in thanking this very stellar VIP panel. For those of you watching live stream, give us a few minutes to set up for panel number 1. And I'd like to ask those panelists to please join me here in front. Thank you. All right, well, moving right along, I want to introduce our first panel. They're going to focus on coordination efforts, regional issues, and remaining challenges of the electricity natural gas interdependencies. And I'd like to introduce the panelists by their names and titles. First, to the left of me is Ms. Ray McQuaid, President and Chief Operating Officer of the North American Energy Standards Board. Kelly Joseph is next to her, Senior Gas and Electric Analyst with the New York Independent System Operator, known as NYSO. She's appearing on behalf of the trade association, the ISO RTO Council. Then Ms. Lynn Dahlberg, Director of Marketing Services of Williams Northwest Pipeline Group, and on behalf of the Western Gas Electric Regional Assessment Task Force. And finally, Joe Holmes, Lead Energy Trader for Colorado Springs Utilities. Before I ask Ms. McQuaid to start, let me just say that the views of the panelists are their own and not those of the Department of Energy or the White House. Ms. McQuaid?
Thank you so much. Let me move this a little closer.
Yes, oh, and one other thing, panelists, if you'll please pull the microphones in close to you. And there is a timing machine over here. We ask you to summarize your comments in 5 minutes. So if you'll watch the timer, when it goes to red, your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for having me here today to talk about a topic that our organization has been working on for 20 years. The Gas Industry Standards Board was our predecessor organization. As Peggy well knows, she was helpful in creating the organization, as was the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy had a key role and, in fact, helped us name the organization. So that should give you a sense of how the DOE supported this effort. We today have more than 2,000 standards supporting the wholesale electric market. We have 1,200 or so standards supporting retail energy market, and we have about 700 standards supporting natural gas. If you look at the types of standards we have, they range from contracting all the way through to the ultimate sale of the product, with everything in between. We're business practices and the electronic communications of transactions type standards and cybersecurity. We do not do reliability standards. We leave that up to NERC. So if you look at the kind of work we've done, in 1994, GISB began to develop the gas transportation nominations deadlines and all of the related standards. About 100 plus standards are related specifically to the nominations timeline. Since then, we and the market have undergone considerable changes. You jump forward to 2000 and we became NASB. We were approached by a number of groups to broaden our standards development to support wholesale electric standards and retail energy standards. Now, if you skip forward to 2004, we had some issues in New England with gas electric harmonization, and then Chairman Pat Wood sent us a letter saying, you need to look at your standards to see what kind of changes are needed to better manage the business transactions. As such, we ended up coming up with a number of standards to support communications between power generation facilities and pipelines, particularly in situations of unanticipated demand. If you jump forward then to 2011, in the Natural Gas Council, through the request of then Secretary Chu, put out a prudent development report, and in that report, the NASB, as well as a number of other organizations, including the ISOs, NERC, and FERC, were all asked to continue efforts to harmonize interactions between the natural gas and electricity markets. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the council when that report came out. So we took that suggestion to heart, and at the end of 2012, NASB used the NPC report as a catalyst and produced a gas electric harmonization report. And in that report, we had 3 primary recommendations that could impact NASB. Looking at standards that would provide greater flexibility in scheduling, looking at standards that would address issues of unsynchronized market clearing times, and looking at standards promoting the availability of information to specific market entities. So we issued that report, but we said we're not going to do any of these standards yet. We need to hear back from the regulators on what it is that they want us to do. Well, be careful what you ask for. So we got a notice of proposed rulemaking in March of this year, and we were off to the races. The notice of proposed rulemaking is docket RM 14-2000, and it came out on March 20th. And in that NOPR, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission proposed a set of nomination timelines and asked NASB with the rest of the industry to determine if those timelines were acceptable or if they had other timelines and adjustments that they would like to offer to the commission. And we were supposed to do all of this by late September. So we were given a very short time frame. As a result, we created a gas electric harmonization group, and that gas electric harmonization group, called the Forum, ended up looking at the timeline and ended up proposing some different aspects of it. They ended up recommending a smaller number of intraday nomination periods where you could adjust your nominations. They did not recommend a specific gas day start. And if you read the order the way that I did and the way that many other people did, the commission set forth a 4 a.m. gas day. Because the Forum and NASB could not come up with an alternative to 4 a.m., we ended up pulling out the 9 a.m. gas day that we have from our standards. So now if you look at our standards, they are being developed, and we are on schedule to make the September deadline. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Joseph. I'm with the New York Independent System Operator, although I'm actually here today also on behalf of the ISO RTO Council. For those of you that don't know, the 7 independent system operators and regional transmission operators operate the nation's bulk electricity grid administer wholesale electricity markets, and conduct system power planning. And 2/3 of all electric consumers in the United States are served by an ISO or RTO. As we're discussing, natural gas has become the fuel of choice for electric generation. In the last few years, all new installed capacity, over 50% of new installed capacity has come from natural gas. And about half of all of the installed capacity in the ISO and RTO regions currently comes from natural gas as well. In some regions, this number is actually quite high. The locations of these plants vary. So in some ISO RTO regions, gas-fired generators are directly connected to interstate pipelines, whereas in others, the majority of gas-fired generators are connected behind a local gas distribution company or on an intrastate pipeline. And we can talk later about maybe why that might be significant. A couple of important issues to understand regarding some differences in how these two markets are structured and the implications for gas and electric system reliability. The gas and electric markets have different operating days and different scheduling times. And currently, one of the things that this means is that in some ISO and RTO regions, generators receive their day-ahead electric schedule after the close of the day-ahead gas timely nomination cycle. In addition, because of the different operating days, as Ray mentioned, the gas system currently operates with a 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. gas operating day, whereas on the electric system, it runs from midnight to midnight. What this means is that generators are purchasing gas and nominating gas over one gas operating day, but over 2 electric days. And again, the schedule for that second electric day is not yet known. These scheduling and operating differences matter because while the electric system is scheduled day ahead, real-time electric system conditions can change from what the day-ahead assumptions were. So when responding to either an unplanned outage in real time or perhaps load forecasting differences, this can require immediate system operator action in order to maintain electric system reliability. Most generators in the wholesale organized energy markets are relying on what's called secondary capacity release or interruptible transportation contracts. And moreover, they're often purchasing gas through marketers. So what this means is that even though gas can be nominated and scheduled every day, it can be difficult sometimes to purchase gas outside of normal business hours. These are the times when gas markets tend to be less liquid. So on weekends, holidays, evening, and overnight hours, it can sometimes be challenging for gas or for generators to purchase their gas. In addition, relying on these secondary interruptible transportation contracts means that generators could be at risk of not being able to transport gas on days when the pipelines are constrained. Now, on most days when the pipeline is not operating during peak conditions, there is quite a bit of flexibility on the pipeline system. In fact, there are some gas pipelines, interstate gas pipelines, that actually allow hourly nominations. This is not all pipelines, however. But during times of operational flow orders, when the pipeline system is either constrained or there's another system condition happening on the pipeline system, this flexibility is very limited. And if these operational flow orders turn into hourly flow restrictions, this further limits flexibility for both the gas system and then how generators may be able to respond. As has already been mentioned, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has taken a number of steps toward better coordinating the gas and electric industries. They held technical conferences over the last few years, specifically looking at these issues, and as Ray mentioned, put out 2 notices. The first was an order actually allowing the ISO and RTOs and interstate pipelines to share operational information about both systems. And then the second was this notice of proposed rulemaking, actually looking at these market timing and scheduling differences that I outlined earlier. The ISOs and the RTOs are also individually working and working collectively. We have an effort underway to come up with some shared communication procedures as to how we'll communicate and share operational information with the gas, between the gas and electric systems. And some of the ISOs and RTOs are looking at potential scheduling changes that they can make to put out their day-ahead schedules prior to the close of this day-ahead gas cycle. I'll just mention that the ISOs continue to support the earlier start to the gas day. We believe that this would help to allow generators to purchase gas in this day-ahead cycle in order to cover both the morning peak and the evening peak of the same electric day. And this is especially important during winter conditions when pipeline system conditions can change drastically from one day to the next. I can talk later about the EIPC effort that's underway. This is a DOE-funded assessment to look at the Eastern Interconnect and look at the gas and electric system infrastructure adequacy, but I can talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut off what are excellent comments, but we can get into a discussion. Next, Ms. Dahlberg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Northwest Pipeline is a primary natural gas transportation artery in the Pacific Northwest and in the Intermountain region. And as has been mentioned here today, the reason we're talking about gas-electric integration is that natural gas is being used increasingly for power generation. And there's many reasons why that's true, and I think Dan has already covered those. So consequently, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, initiated a proceeding to ensure that the outages and reliability problems are not the result of a lack of coordination between the gas and electric industries. So FERC has chosen to address basically two items on the national front. One, they want to encourage communications between gas and electric, and two, they want to reconcile the mismatch that occurs that Kelly was just talking about between the electric day and the gas day. And both industries want the same thing. They both want natural gas to be a reliable fuel source for electric generation, and they both have demonstrated a willingness to collaborate. FERC addressed the communication protocol in a final rule last November, and in general, both industries agreed with the final rule, and both industries agreed that it was a good idea. As to the scheduling timelines, there is now a majority consensus in NASB for the scheduling timelines. Both industries think it's a good idea, but when it comes to the National Gas Day, there is no consensus that it's a good idea to change it. Northwest Pipeline's customers believe that starting the gas day at 4 a.m. Central Time could hurt their long-standing reliability and impose significant costs with little or no benefit. FERC should consider how these changes will impact all pipeline customers, not just electric generators. FERC should also consider the regional differences that occur. Northwest Pipeline's experience is far different than our sister organization, Transco, that delivers gas on the East Coast. In organized electric markets, generators are dispatched based on the low-cost basis, and there's little to no incentive to contract for firm pipeline transportation, which is often more expensive than interruptible transportation. In bilateral markets, the seller agrees to deliver a product to the buyer. The reliability is clearly delineated. The Pacific Northwest has a bilateral electric market, and Northwest Pipeline has 24 power plants that has the potential to burn 1 billion cubic feet per day. 23 of the 24 power plants have firm pipeline capacity. The power is owned by integrated electric utilities that can recover the costs of holding the firm pipeline capacity through rates approved by their state commissions. It appears that there is an incentive for gas-fired generators in bilateral markets to hold firm pipeline capacity, and there is a disincentive for generators in organized electric markets. One could argue that this disincentive is frustrating the ability for regions like New England to build the necessary pipeline infrastructure. In New England and Northeast, pipelines often run full during peak day periods, and there isn't enough interruptible capacity for electric generators. In contrast, Northwest customers have firm capacity. Regions with an electric market, organized market that wish to rely on natural gas-fired generators to provide electric support electric reliability must find a way to ensure that the electric industry subscribes to the firm transportation necessary to ensure pipeline expansions. Another regional difference is the hours of daylight. 4 a.m. is 2 a.m. Pacific time. Some infrastructure in the West is not fully automated, and pipeline customers are worried that having to go out in the middle of the night to make manual adjustments they're worried about safety and operational concerns. Pipelines also believe there is a reliability risk due to the fact that producers, gatherers, and processors, which are not regulated by FERC and thus do not have to abide by a change to the gas day, may not choose to go out in the middle of the night and make the necessary manual adjustments. Some customers believe that this is an East Coast solution that may make things worse for people in the West. In closing, changing the gas day will not address the primary problem, and it could create problems that don't exist today. The primary problem is FERC should make sure that the electric industry find a way for them to recover their costs for subscribing to firm pipeline capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes?
Good morning. My name is Joe Holmes, and I'm lead energy trader for Colorado Springs Utilities. CSU is a municipally owned for-service utility providing electricity, natural gas, water, and wastewater services to businesses and residential customers in the Pikes Peak region. CSU is the second largest utility in the state of Colorado. I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate on this panel today. I am here today as a representative of Colorado Springs Utilities and the American Public Gas Association. APGA is a national association for publicly owned natural gas distribution systems. There are currently approximately 1,000 public gas systems located in 37 states. Publicly owned systems are not-for-profit retail distribution entities owned by and accountable to the citizens that they serve. Public gas systems' primary focus is on providing safe, reliable, affordable service to their over 12 million customers. The issue of gas-electric interdependency/coordination is important for the public gas system since it will, among other things, change the manner in which interstate natural gas pipelines provide services to local gas distribution companies and potentially raise the cost of these services. Given that 95% of the public gas systems, including Colorado Springs, are captive to single natural gas pipelines, the importance of this issue to public gas systems cannot be overstated. The current system of nomination cycles has worked well for our public utilities. However, APGA members are very concerned that efforts to improve gas-electric coordination should not result in unintended adverse consequences. These prospective consequences include daily operating difficulties and cost increases. In short, the current gas transportation system works well for existing long-term customers, and any mandates to significantly change this system to accommodate substantially different customer requirements should also include protections for existing customers and operations and costs. As it came up during the FERC technical conferences, a lack of adequate regional gas pipeline infrastructure can create market challenges to accommodating the needs of gas-fired power generators as well as other customers. Many of these concerns expressed at the FERC conferences are due to problems associated with generators' inability to secure gas pipeline capacity in a constrained capacity market. In other words, there is insufficient pipe in the ground to serve all the willing customers. However, with a robust physical infrastructure in place, many of the operational and even scheduling concerns raised would likely be resolved. One problem, especially in New England, appears to be a missing capability for generators to collect the cost of firm physical gas pipeline capacity in their service charges. APGA recognizes that some electricity generators could benefit during their morning ramp-up period by an early start in the gas day. However, changing the gas day from 9 a.m. Central Time to 4 a.m. Central Time, all else being equal, will have adverse impacts on many gas systems. These impacts include hiring additional employees and potential pipeline imbalance penalties, as well as one-time costs associated to IT systems, field equipment, reprogramming gate stations, meters, SCADA, and even contract renegotiations. These impacts need to be fairly considered. Ultimately, the gas system customers can be burdened with these costs while receiving no benefit from the changes if the changes are simply implemented to benefit one customer class at the expense of another. Public gas systems have maintained that solely focusing on the natural gas industry changes will not solve operational and cost recovery problems in regional power markets and ultimately stands to deflect from the central issues that could be addressed in those markets. That said, it does appear that FERC, via their dockets in EL 14, 22 through 27, initiating an investigation into ISO and RTO scheduling practices, is attempting to follow up on their changes to gas market regulations with conforming changes by RTOs and ISOs. For example, regional electric transmission organizations currently have a wide disparity in their electric scheduling deadlines and appear to have made no uniform effort to synchronize with existing natural gas pipeline schedules. However, FERC Order EL 14 appears to be designated to promote scheduling conformity subsequent to the gas pipeline changes currently under discussion in FERC's March NOPR. This would be most helpful. The APGA and its large membership of public gas systems recognizes the need to prepare our natural gas pipeline systems to meet the needs of all customers. We are prepared to be flexible. However, we are also compelled to aggressively represent our customers with respect to challenges to system operations and cost increases not fairly allocated to the benefiting customers. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to participate on this panel today and look forward to the upcoming discussion.
Thank you very much. Well, we've heard a lot of concerns addressed by these panelists today, particularly regional concerns, the disconnect between the natural gas day and the electric day. So I'd like to go down the panel and ask you all, what further coordination efforts can industry and government do beyond the FERC NOPR, beyond the NASB standards? What's missing? Is there a gap? And how do we fill the coordination to answer this disconnect? Ray?
Okay, and this is Ray's answer, not NASB's answer. So I want that on the record up front because I represent both sides of this discussion. I think more discourse is needed, but to be honest, the discussions we've heard, the remarks we've heard, we've been hearing these remarks for 10 years. These are not new. You could in the NASB meetings, depending on the remarks that were made, identify the person, identify the segment of the market they were in. A lot of those issues are already relatively well understood. The problem is we don't have a silver bullet to answer all of this. And I do agree that a lot of this is regional. When you do hear about the issues in New England, they are not the same issues you hear about in Arizona. Arizona has its own set of congestion issues that cause problems with gas-electric coordination. These can be handled by a number of different ways. I mean, it's not a one answer for everything. You're going to have to look at regulatory change. You may have to look at contractual changes. You may have to look at the business transactions that are going on and some operational changes. I don't think it's an easy answer, or we would have done it by now. So I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but it's clear that the markets are shifting in this direction. The statistics that Dan gave earlier point to that, and we need to address it.
Ms. Joseph?
As Ray said, I think in the discussions that we had at NASB, there were actually a lot of really interesting concepts that came up, things that I wasn't aware of until these meetings. We've had a ton of discussion on this issue. It's very complicated. It's very challenging. But honestly, every time we do get into a room and have some discussion, some new ideas come up and new potential solutions, I think, come up. You know, we talked at NASB, some very innovative ideas included maybe having 2 different gas days, so a Western day and Eastern day. We talked about having a common energy day. We talked about how some things work in the gas market, how they were designed years ago, and maybe some changes that could happen today. And, you know, I think one of the things that doesn't get discussed a lot is what we can do with gas storage and some things that we can do with gas storage markets that might actually help. Perhaps gas storage could operate somewhat like ancillary services do on the electric system. There has really not been a lot of discussion about that. So, I think, again, it's challenging. There's a lot of issues, but I do think that there are some potential ideas out there that could help.
Ms. Dahlberg?
Thank you. I think the bottom line for me is that if there were adequate infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure, all around the country, we probably would not be talking about the gas day and the scheduling timelines. And I think there needs to be, I guess I'm a business major, economics 101. You have to have the incentives in place to make pipeline infrastructure happen. And I know that's the topic of panel 2, so I won't get into that. But to me, we wouldn't be talking about the issues if there were the infrastructure in place. So the incentives really need to be there.
This will be just me like Ray. This will be Joe talking, not necessarily Colorado Springs Utilities or APGA, but the problem seems simple sometimes when you look at why generators have problems making electricity when they're called on. It's because they don't have a firm fuel supply. And it seems to me that maybe an entity like NERC or someone should describe what is the difference between firm power and intermittent power. Because it's hard to have a dialogue, which kind of gets to what Lynn's talking about. It's kind of hard to have a dialogue if you think you have a firm power plant and it's just ready to go. The only problem is that we can't get pipeline capacity and we don't want to buy it. If you build a power plant and you don't have fuel for it, it's not firm. And so I think we need to get to that point in the dialogue, and maybe there will be dual fuel power plants which don't need firm fuel on either side, which will be some level of firm. But I think we need to get some definition of what we're talking about there. The other thing that I would suggest is that we work to look at the difference between structural issues and financial issues. When I look at ISO New England, for example, or at least up to a year ago or so, it seemed more like a financial issue, not really a structural issue. I mean, they don't have enough pipeline in the ground, but the pipelines are willing and able to put that infrastructure in place. They're ready to do it today. I haven't met a pipeline representative yet that doesn't want to talk about expansion. The other side of the coin is the revenue side. The revenue side, the RTO is not going to pay for it. The generators are not going to pay for that capacity. It's you and me in our homes when we flip the lights on that are going to pay for that pipeline capacity. And I think everything in the middle between the revenue-paying customers for the electricity and the pipeline is causing noise that we can't quite get this revenue to travel where it needs to travel. Because I, for one, I like flipping my light switch and having the lights come on. I don't want to question whether or not there's any fuel available because it's a cold day outside. So I think those two things, kind of defining what is an intermittent resource and a firm resource, that distinction, and then separating the physical and financial issues.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit and ask you all, and maybe start with Kelly, what kind of reforms do you think might be useful in an RTO region that can answer these structural and financial challenges?
So one thing I think is important to point out, while it is important for generators to have fuel. I like Peter Brandine from ISO New England, he said at FERC, look, generators need fuel, and it is challenging to think about how we've set up our markets and how we can structure our markets given the increasing nature of just-in-time resources. That's a challenge across the country, whether it's from gas or from renewables. It's an ongoing challenge. I think it's important to recognize, however, that firm transportation doesn't necessarily mean, number one, that you have no reliability concerns on the electric system, and number two, that it is necessarily easy to have, some of these in-day changes that you might need on the pipeline. So one of the things that is a big effort at all of the ISOs and RTOs is to really get a handle on both the electric system and the natural gas system, and thinking through potential contingencies on one system that could impact the other. So if all generators had firm contract on the gas system, if there was an issue on a handful of pipes, then there would be issues on the electric system, regardless of the type of transportation contract generators had. And vice versa, there can be issues on the electric system that can impact gas system reliability as well. A lot of the ISOs and RTOs are looking at making some market design changes to think through fuel assurance and think through all types of fuel, not just gas, and thinking about, have we structured our markets and created rules that incent the kind of behavior we want from generators? And that's something that we're all looking at.
What about in the non-RTO regions, like here out west? Ms. Dahlberger, Mr. Holmes, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on what Kelly said too. We totally agree. We have a large power plant, gas-fired power plant in Colorado Springs, and and my group actually manages the natural gas supply for both the LDC and the power plants. And one thing you realize about power plants is that they can trip, so they can go off in the middle of the night. It doesn't matter what the gas day is or all the regulations that are around it. It just trips because there's a problem with the plant. We could have another power supply trip and run a plant up to full load as quickly as possible. And these events produce huge swings on the pipelines. And just having transportation capacity to serve, say, a base load type environment is not sufficient to balance the loads on the pipeline or to make the electric resource firm. Really need to talk a lot more about balancing and balancing products. We have a no-notice transportation agreement with Colorado Interstate Gas Pipeline, and we rely on that heavily for both our LDC load and our power plants. And so I think there is a lot of work to do on that. I forgot the second part of the question.
I think you covered it. Okay. I wanted to know about reforms in an non-RTO region.
Yeah, okay.
Ms. Dahlberg, you want to add to that?
No, I think basically in the non-RTO region, flexibility can, I agree with Kelly. Having firm pipeline capacity isn't a 100% guarantee, but it's pretty darn close. I think on Northwest Pipeline, we rely on gas storage. We have a significant amount of storage, and we use that if there's an upstream pipeline fails to get us the adequate supply into our pipeline, we'd use pipeline storage. We also rely on other pipelines. They're very accommodating when one has a problem, and no one wants the lights to go out. So I think there's a number of avenues that we pursue to maintain our flexibility.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure.
The follow-up that I was thinking of is that at Colorado Springs, we actually have firm transportation for our gas-fired generation that we consider to be firm. So we have 100% sufficiency. We also have storage agreements so that we can use storage for balancing, specifically for our power plants. And we have balancing through the no-notice sharing of no-notice storage as well. And our ratepayers pay for that. And they've always, the plant has always been firm. We've never had a fuel problem there at this point in time.
I guess I do want to add one other thing. Northwest Pipeline is part of a group called, we call it PNUC, Pacific Northwest Utility Commission Conference. And they did a study, and they assumed no natural gas was available to serve any of the gas-fired generation in the Pacific Northwest. And they did this on a peak day, and they assumed that the gas-fired generators that have diesel backup were running. And then, of course, hydro is a huge contributor to electric generation in the Pacific Northwest. And they were able to say that they could meet their needs on a peak day. So I think oil backup is another important thing. But again, the ratepayers pay for that. So they pay for their reliability.
So you all have talked about scheduling difficulties, and NASB is a standard-setting organization. One of the things that we at the Department of Energy are thinking about, and I'd like all of you to address, which is a little broader than the specifics, is the electrification of the natural gas industry. We've heard a lot over the years about how the natural gas industry is relying more and more on natural gas. But we're now learning through scheduling issues and standards and some of the FERC NOPRs that the electrification of the natural gas industry is emerging as a huge challenge. And so I wondered if you all had any general comments on that new development, shall we say.
Sure, I'll start. If you look at what NERC is doing with ensuring reliability, I think they're clearly focused on they see both sides of the coin. They see the need for the power generators to get the natural gas, but they also see the reliance of the natural gas industry on electricity as well, because you couldn't really operate a lot of your compressor stations
Right.
and anything else without the electricity being there. And I think at one point in the late 90s, we actually had a blackout because of some of the gas compressor stations not getting the electricity they needed to move the natural gas. So there actually has been some situations where that's happened. NERC has taken a very strong role in this. I think it's important to look at this not just as an operational issue, and I understand the need or want to separate the financial issue from the operational issues, but I don't think you can. If you look at how gas pipelines are built, they're built based on firm service. Firm service requires price signals. Those price signals are financial. So you're not going to get all of the expansions that you might need in infrastructure if you don't have the right financial incentives that were mentioned. And if you look at financial incentives, that means you actually do need to look at how people buy firm service and can they actually use firm service? Because what Kelly said earlier is absolutely correct. There are situations where you can have all the firm service in the world, but in unanticipated demand with the way the rules are set up, you may not be able to get it. The priorities may have shifted, you may have missed the bumping cycle, so all of a sudden while you've paid for firm, you don't actually have the gas you need. So it's you have to look at both sides of this and realize that they are intertwined. And I think that NERC is doing that, we do that. I think pretty much everybody in the industry realizes they've got to do both of those. It's just that now we have a term for it.
Right.
Now it's called electrification.
Kelly?
So I think I understand what you're asking, and I mentioned the Eastern Interconnect Planning Collaborative, the big study, DOE-funded study that we're doing. A lot of the ISOs and RTOs in the Eastern region are involved in this, and other planning authorities as well. And one of the contingencies that we're looking at, so this is a big study doing a baseline assessment of all of the gas infrastructure and all of the electric generation currently in the Eastern Interconnect, looking out 5 years, 10 years, assessing the adequacy of both sectors, going forward with the anticipated additional gas demand. And then one of the big parts of the study is actually looking at contingencies on both systems. So really understanding how electric system contingencies might impact the gas system as it is currently and looking forward, and then vice versa. And specifically going through and identifying where there might be locations on the gas pipeline system that are electric dependent. But I won't speak for the pipelines, but my understanding is that there's a lot of redundancy, I'll say, built in, and the recognition that you still need to be able to operate the gas system even if there was some kind of an electric system failure. So I won't speak for them, but that's my understanding.
Ms. Dahlberg?
Thank you. As far as this being a new development, I think in the Pacific Northwest, each integrated electric utility.
Can you bring the mic up close to your mouth? The court reporter is having a hard time hearing you all.
Yes, as far as natural gas being a new development, the increasing use of it, each integrated electric utility will determine their needs going forward. There is no central planning commission, if you will, or planning arm. And I think there are also, I think, a difference between the Pacific Northwest and, say, the Midwest is the amount of coal-fired generation. There's only 2 coal-fired power plants in the Pacific Northwest. They're scheduled for retirements in 2020 and 2025. So this is not a huge opportunity that all of a sudden gas is going to be, you know, a brand new fuel source. Basically for us, I think how much gas is used year to year largely depends on the hydro year.
Mr. Holmes?
If I understand your question correctly, I'm not sure that I totally do. When you say electrification, are you talking about actually having electric compression on gas pipelines?
Yes, I think Ray mentioned, you know, the reliance on electrified compressors and transformers and other pipeline equipment that rely on, that can't produce if the electricity goes out.
I'm sorry,
Right.
I didn't understand the question.
Yeah,
I didn't answer it correctly.
Can't
And I
function.
don't know how much I really have to add to that other than, I think as we put these very large and volatile generation units online, and as we look at the system as a whole to to all the changes that are going to occur to it, the gas pipeline system itself, I think Lynn would agree, was basically developed for thermal load over a long period of time, for an LDC type load, for for heat load in the winter, and in the summer we could inject into storage. The other thing is the thermal loads don't move nearly as quickly as the generation loads. You're not going to have a cold day in Denver and then have it -10 today and 80 degrees tomorrow or 90 degrees tomorrow. We come close sometimes. But with a big generator, they can literally fall off. So I think there's the balancing part of that is a big part of the equation, and how we actually power the entire system. I totally agree with you. I mean, we have gas-fired compressors on the pipeline. We have electric compressors now. I think they're more environmentally friendly. So we really need to ensure, as this system grows, that we take care of it, completely.
Anybody want to comment on each other's answers?
No, one thing I would like to add now that I better understand the question. One thing that we do in the Pacific Northwest is we get together and we have, I want to say maybe a couple times a year, and we get all of the electric and all the gas participants in the room, and we talk about what if there is a failure, and we actually do kind of a round table mock emergency, and we say today's scenario is that we don't get any Canadian gas across the border in Washington. What are we going to do? And there are parties that can, for example, switch. Maybe they can use their oil backup. And so then other parties in the room can identify and say, on that day, I could actually contract with that party and pay them to use their oil backup so that I can have their gas, since I don't have an oil backup. And so we try to encourage that these commercial transactions take place up front, so that when the emergency does occur, you know who to call, who can back off the gas need, who can provide you, with different commercial alternatives.
Thank you. So the Quadrennial Energy Review Task Force is grappling with what should the federal government's role be in all of this. It's a topic of high concern. So I'd like for each of you to think about, if you had the ability to give the task force one specific recommendation to look at in the issue of gas and electric interdependency. what would your primary recommendation be? And why don't we switch it up? Mr. Holmes, you start, and then we'll come down the opposite direction.
This deals with maybe the financial part of this. The one thing that the government could definitely help with is ensuring that we don't have cross subsidies, that we ensure that the customers coming on to the gas pipeline systems pay their freight, because, well, for obvious reasons. That's one role that they play as a regulator. Another one would be, and this is just me talking, I've been to one panel discussion at FERC, and it seemed like panic is too strong of a word, but there's really a lot of anxiety to get something done sooner rather than later. And the one mistake I think the government could make is by imposing unilateral solutions across the entire United States, because as some of the panelists have already talked about, we have individual issues and individual solutions in different regions. And so I think the government, the federal government, needs to be careful that they don't impose a one-size-fits-all that actually ends up making us all less efficient.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Dahlberg, Ms. Dahlberg, excuse me.
I guess I would say that regions with an organized electric market that wish to rely on natural gas-fired generation to support electric reliability must find a way to ensure that the electric industry subscribes for firm transportation capacity to ensure timely expansions. So it really is just giving, I mean, the generators are making rational decisions. They just need to have the incentive to make their product more reliable.
Kelly?
One thing I think is important to recognize is so Ray mentioned and others have as well. So the typical way that interstate pipelines are financed are through these long-term contracts that typically a local gas distribution company takes out, 20, 30-year transportation contract on a pipeline. And then one of the interesting markets that FERC created years ago were capacity release markets. And so most of the time, the pipelines are built to withstand, a peak winter day. And it's most of the time not a peak winter day. So that would be really underutilized pipelines most of the time. So these capacity release markets help to ensure that the infrastructure on the gas system is used most of the time. And that's typically what generators are buying. And I think, very interestingly, a lot of producers are starting to finance some of these pipelines. So you're starting to see producers who really want to get the gas out and want it to be in particular markets. We've seen at least one mostly producer-funded pipeline in New York, and there's another producer-funded pipeline that's slated for development. So we are seeing some pipeline built out, not necessarily from the traditional ways that we've seen it in the past. I think it is important to recognize that there are some regional differences, but I also think, really looking at the way that these capacity release markets have worked and really looking at the way that traditional financing for interstate pipelines have worked and sort of, evaluating and looking at how it's worked in the past, where we're at now, and really looking, at some of those mechanisms, I think is important.
Okay, I'm going to take a slightly different tact from everyone else. When we look at how we anticipate our markets changing, we're using more renewables, we're retiring coal, we're depending more on natural gas, not just for peaking, but also for load, for power generation, yet we still also need to meet all of the requirements of the gas users that aren't power generators. The Department of Energy is in a unique position to coordinate all of that so that we could come up with solutions that would be more inclusive. I think we have to stop looking at what is the solution for natural gas, what is the solution for electricity, what is the solution for coal, we need to look at it overall, and the Department of Energy is in the perfect spot to pull all of those folks together and encourage them to sit down and come up with some solutions, because our market is changing. I mean, you can't deny the numbers that Dan said before. And then when you tack on what 2015 may look like, it's going to be even more different then. So I can understand the concern that we might be reacting a little too quickly to some of this, but I do think it's important for the country to look at it, and the Department of Energy is in the perfect spot to do that.
You know, that brings up a good question, which we've talked about in other QER public meetings, and that is the importance of public-private partnerships.
Yes.
You all are involved in a plethora of groups and coalitions and organizations, but talking from the federal government's perspective, what I hear you saying, Ray, is that there's a convening role for the federal government. Talk to me a little more, any of you, about your vision for public-private partnerships in this area of bringing the electric and gas industries closer together and understanding each other better to form solutions that benefit all.
You want me to speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, having just gone through a GEH forum that had more than 300 participants in each meeting, we held all of these meetings in a 1-month period of time, basically. We had over 8,000 electronic votes taken on decisions. Most of the people sitting at this panel had cast votes in those decisions, and that they led on to each other. I think it's crucial that the federal agencies, and I'm not looking just at the DOE, but there are a number, the Department of Interior, number of different federal agencies work with trade associations, work with NARUC. They really, NARUC has just a, in fact, Peggy and I were talking, that's where we run into each other all the time now. NARUC just has an immense ability to pull everybody together and to have NERC involved in all of this. Then I think you're actually going to start talking the same language. You're going to stop looking at siloed solutions that only may support one company or one segment of the industry, and start looking at it more holistically, and I think you have to do that.
Terrific.
So for those of you who don't know, in ISO New England, there is an effort, the New England governors got together, and they're really looking to think about how they can encourage additional infrastructure build out on the gas system and really link that to the electric system. So that's an ongoing effort. They're really looking at the role that the ISO can play in ensuring and purchasing capacity on a transportation pipeline and making sure that adequate infrastructure exists. So there's one example that's an ongoing effort, and I can't tell you exactly what's happening there, but it's very interesting.
Anybody else? Okay, well, I'm going to take the privilege of changing topics and want to solicit your advice and counsel on gas storage and efficiency. We have not talked about the fact that gas storage and efficiency efforts can provide more natural gas and may, in fact, eliminate the need for new pipelines, may or may not. You may have comments on that. So can we talk a little bit about that and how efforts are going forward with gas storage and efficiency and the impact there on the electric system and the coordination between the two? Kelly, you want to start?
Sure. So this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier. I think that there is a role for thinking about how we can better utilize gas storage and thinking about potentially developing some markets around storage and making that more accessible. My understanding of how it works now is most of what's in storage is, again, for local gas distribution companies, perhaps others who also buy some storage space on the pipeline. And, generators, some have access to it, some do not. It really, I think, sometimes depends on their marketer. So if their marketer is working with a local gas distribution company that has storage in their region, then that's something that's available to them. That's, as many of you know, a challenge in New England. There is no gas storage in New England, and that's part of the challenge. I think one of the interesting things that came out actually through the NASB process was a discussion on, this no-notice firm and utilizing storage in that way. And one of the very interesting things that came out was that it's not necessarily another, fail-safe solution, because even if you do have that kind of transportation, number one, you need storage. You need to actually have storage in your region to be able to take advantage of that. And then number two, if you take gas out, you still need to be able to put gas back into the pipeline. So again, these scheduling timing differences matter, and how often you can actually schedule and nominate on the pipeline also play a role. So again, I think there is a role to look at how we can better utilize gas storage and thinking about how generators might be able to use that.
Mr. Holmes or Ms. Dahlberg?
Kelly is right in that the majority of the storage, at least on Northwest Pipeline, is contracted for under long-term storage agreements. However, Northwest Pipeline does have 2 billion cubic feet a day of storage that it utilizes for balancing. So we put that into our rates, and all of our customers, whether they utilize it or not, pay, and it's less than 0.5 cents a decatherm. It's a very, very small portion of our rate, but we use it for balancing. I think pipelines could work in different regions and hold different amounts of capacity for balancing. It's basically what the shippers are willing to pay. So there are some creative alternatives out there for storage. And as far as efficiency, if I'm understanding that question correctly, on Northwest Pipeline, our market in 2008, because of the recession, we lost a lot of market demand. But we also started really seeing a lot of the effects of efficiency, of the light bulbs, everything, I think. And so we are just now catching up to market demand from 2008. So we have not been growing. We've just gradually have been keeping steady.
Mr. Holmes, any comments on storage and efficiency?
Just quickly, clearly storage is going to be an important part of the solution for gas-electric interdependency. And it is really interesting to think about the different ways that might happen. I was thinking the other day, and Lynn may tell me that this won't work, but one idea maybe, if you actually have firm storage available as an end user, say as a power plant, I think maybe you could work out a separate scheduling cycle for that. If there was certainty on the pipeline that you had receipt of gas, and there was certainty on the pipeline that you had delivery of gas on the other side, I think the pipeline would be more comfortable than having, you could, and I'll just say this, maybe you could have an hourly nomination cycle of some kind if there was certainty on both sides. And if there was certainty, maybe there could be higher penalties if for some reason what was supposed to happen didn't happen. But another route, which is also expensive, is LNG peaking units. So you can get a lot of gas out of those units, but you can't gasify it or liquefy it very quickly. So they're kind of like a one-way storage. But again, that as a supplement to other resources on the pipeline could be really helpful. I think there's a lot of good creative discussion to have around that.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with Joe. And basically on our pipeline, because storage is such a certainty, gas generators can call our gas control 24 hours a day and say, I'm going to come on, I'm going to take some supply. And we don't require a nomination cycle. We just say, fix it in the in the next cycle. So yes, we do that.
So we've talked a lot about scheduling and standards and the FERC-NOPR. What other operational, and I'll throw in financial since you've raised it, issues does this emerging interdependency bring up? And do you have any, beyond scheduling and nominations and those things, are there some other operational solutions that this task force should be thinking about and considering? Ms. Dahlberg, you want to take a first shot?
No, I think I'd probably stand by my answer about creating the economic incentives for, like Joe said, the ratepayers are going to pay in the end for the electricity reliability. How do we get those costs attributed to them? Who is going to pay? I think fixing that is the single biggest fix.
And not a small issue. Who's going to pay?
No.
It never is.
Anybody else?
I'll comment. Oh, would you like to?
Go ahead.
So we deal with this on the trading floor every day. We live in different worlds, gas and electric, and it's something that could use some improvement today, even without the onslaught of big power generators. So in Colorado, we're on mountain time. The gas day starts at 8 a.m. here. The electric day starts at midnight. And so, for example, if we're surplus power capacity, and I'll try to not get too far in the weeds, but just so you can feel our pain a little bit, when we buy gas for a 24/7 sale by our for fuel for our gas generators so that they can make an electric sale, we buy gas today starting for 8 a.m. tomorrow, when their sale may start at midnight tonight. And not only that, but just pre-schedule through the weekend, for example. We buy gas, natural gas, today for tomorrow, every day, except on Friday, we buy gas for delivery on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. In the electric world, they pre-schedule power on Thursday for Friday and Saturday, and on Friday for Sunday and Monday. And the gas market doesn't trade that way. So we are constantly looking for ways to manage our storage efficiently and things like that to make all that sync up. And you bring up the scheduling. Whatever we come away with at the end of this long integration process, I hope that we have some scheduling that really makes sense on both sides. I really think there are inefficiencies built into the system. I can tell you, if we try to buy gas on Sunday, it's very expensive because the producer representative already sold that gas Friday, and he's gone. And so they're not going to wait around for us. So I think there's some real inefficiencies in the system that we could smooth out right now. Thank you.
Thank you. One final question. I want to give each of you a chance to give some final thoughts and recommendations to the task force based on these issues. Any final thoughts? We've got the White House and several other important people in the room, and we'll take your comments back. So I want to give you a chance for some final comments to the task force. Who wants to start? Ray?
I don't mind.
You're next to me.
Thank you. Well, I do think that scheduling is a critical issue for the recognition that the gas and electric markets need to be better harmonized than they are now. That's not the only issue to be addressed. I think that Lynn's remarks about the need for infrastructure and the need to have the proper incentives to show where infrastructure is needed is crucial. but these are all intertwined. You can't pick one apart from the other, which I think is an important recognition that everyone should make, and that everybody has to be involved in this, that it has to include the states, the munis, the co-ops, the trade associations, the pipelines, the intrastate pipelines, which we haven't talked about much, and are also equally critical to getting gas where it's supposed to go. When you look at these issues, they're not simple, and it's going to take, I hate to say it takes a village, but I think it's going to take a village to figure out the best way to move forward. Thank you.
See if I can summarize
And can you pull close to the mic?
I'll see if I can summarize three major concerns or three major issues. I think one of the things that's really important to recognize, as Ray just mentioned, is that, and I started out saying this, but there are essentially two kinds of generators. There are those that are directly connected to an interstate pipeline, which is FERC jurisdiction, and then there are those that are located behind a gas LDC or an intrastate pipeline, which are state regulated. So I think right there, some, big issues there. Secondly, I think, some of these issues related to market timing, the scheduling differences, the operating day differences, these aren't just, small concerns. These tend to be big concerns, because if generators have difficulty in day nominating gas outside of typical scheduling times that are set on the pipelines, or if generators are looking to purchase and nominate gas over multiple days, this can be a challenge. And then thirdly, I don't know who can help with this, but one of the big concerns is thinking through how liquid the gas markets are and what we can do to further encourage liquidity there, because generators are typically purchasing through marketers. There is an exchange that's set up. That exchange is really Monday through Friday. And outside of those hours, generators are relying on whoever they know and how much their marketer has access to gas. And if the scheduling times on different pipelines are different, then if a marketer does have gas and can get it to a generator, if the two pipelines don't have the same nominating schedules, then maybe that gas can't flow. There's a lot of challenges thinking through how we can make these markets more liquid, more transparent, so that we understand who's buying gas and where they're buying gas and how easy it is to flow that gas. Even though you can nominate gas every day, purchasing can still be a challenge.
Thank you.
I guess I would like to say that.
Close to the mic, please.
Sorry. I would like to say that, this is a collaborative effort, and I think, Kelly and I might disagree about whether 4 a.m. is better or 9 a.m. is better. But in the end, it has to work for everyone. And I think that, again, the incentives are the number one thing that needs to be accomplished. I guess I'll just have to stand on that. I think that's the number one thing. I think spending time on the gas day, I realize that, there are problems that could be addressed in the east with a 4 a.m. gas day. But it doesn't work in all parts of the country. It's not an improvement there. I think that's probably all I would like to say.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes, final word.
A couple of things. I think Kelly mentioned something that we hadn't talked a lot about that's really important, and that is the commodity gas market following along with whatever these scheduling changes are and operating changes are. And that's a market that will follow the money. And I know in our trading floor, we've talked a little bit about moving the first timely cycle from 10:30 in the morning deadline to a 1 p.m. deadline, which is probably going to happen. And we're wondering if gas is going to be held off the market because there could be a difference in the demand over that period. And so it's going to cause us some new dynamics. And so that was a really good point I thought that she made too. That we need to start talking about that. The other thing I'll just say quickly too, in just looking at equity, in costs and operations, I can tell you Colorado Springs is a member of the American Public Gas Association. So, but for us, right now, the gas day starts at 8 a.m. in the morning, Mountain Time. So that's 6 to 9 is about our peak load. And so we're right in the middle of our peak load when the gas day starts. So we buy gas today. We would like to buy gas today for tomorrow's peak load, but we really end up buying it some for tomorrow's load and some for the next day's load. And so it's not as efficient. If we move the gas day up to start actually forward of our peak, then we could buy gas today for tomorrow. And we get a forecast of what that will be every day at 6 a.m. And it can get pretty cold here, and it can get pretty cold pretty quickly here. And so it's really helpful to us to have that extra time. But that said, I would say the majority of the APGA members that I've talked to find it a hardship to move that gas day from 9 a.m. Central. A lot of them are on Eastern time zone, and they come in at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and their gas day starts at 10. And so they're able to work with their natural gas pipeline to reconcile their balances prior to the start of the next gas day. And that saves them imbalance penalties on the pipe. And they really don't want to move that because they'll be facing that gas day start because they'll be facing penalties. So if we change it, then we have to look at the impact on them and how that's going to be managed. In fact, they said if you're going to, don't start the gas day at 3 a.m. Eastern time. If you're going to move it that far back, move it to midnight, because they're going to have to try and get people in at 2 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning to start their day and try to balance with the pipeline. And so I don't know that problem doesn't have a solution, but we just can't let people, and there'll be a lot of other examples of the same thing. We just need to remember to take all of those issues into account when we develop this new gas day and new scheduling regimen. Thank you.
Wow, we have learned so much this morning from all of you. I want to thank you on behalf of the Department of Energy and the QER Task Force. This has been truly informative. We hope you all are going to file comments on behalf of the organizations that you represent today. And please join me in giving these stellar speakers a round of applause. Thank you all. Now we'll take a minute to set up for panel 2. Thank you. While we are doing that, let me remind you of 2 addresses that you must write down. The QER address is www.energy.gov/QER. All of the speakers' presentations and other very good information regarding this meeting are on the website, and you can find it under today's meeting. Also, we encourage all of you to file written comments, and that address is QERcomments@hq.doe.gov.
Peggy, I'm David.
Dave, so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Oops. You're gone. Okay, would everyone please take their seats? Let me remind everyone watching and attending that the panelists' views are their own and not of the Department of Energy's in the White House. Before I introduce the panelists, I wanted to recognize dignitary that's in the room, but he just walked out. Mark Gabriel, the Director of the Western Area Power Administration, is here. Mark, you want to give us a wave? Thank you for joining. We appreciate it. Thank you. Karen apologizes for not recognizing you sooner. Let me turn to our distinguished panelists now. The title of this panel is Infrastructure Needs Through 2013. So our first panel talked about the coordination needs of the two industries. We're now going to talk about the infrastructure needs. To my left is David Eves, President and CEO, Public Service Company of Colorado. To his left is Curtis Moffitt, Deputy General Counsel and Vice President for Gas for Kinder Morgan. Clifton Carney, Executive Vice President and General Manager, Brazos Electric Cooperative. And Beth Musich, Director, Energy Markets and Capacity Products, Southern California Gas Company and San Diego Gas and Electric Company, on behalf of the Western Gas Electric Regional Assessment Task Force. And finally, Arnie Olson, Partner, Energy and Environmental Economics, on behalf of the Western Natural Gas Electric Interdependency Study. So with that, I want to welcome you all, and Mr. Eves, the floor is yours. Remember that you have 5 minutes and the time clock is to your right. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. I would like to join Commissioner Patton in welcoming you all to Colorado. I was going to tell you that the weather's always like this, but I can no longer do that. She already said winter is coming. So, I appreciate, my company appreciates very much the opportunity to participate in this QER meeting and to provide input to the Department of Energy. We're an investor-owned integrated electric and natural gas utility serving 8 states, including Colorado, which is where I work. We're the 6th largest natural gas LDC in the country, and here in Colorado we serve about 1.3 million customers through Public Service Company of Colorado. In the electric side of our business, we have a very strong track record of emissions reductions by incorporating very significant amounts of renewable energy, energy efficiency, emission controls, coal plant conversions. We've been the #1 wind energy utility in the country for the last decade. I think we're one of the 5 strongest utilities for energy efficiency, in the top 10 for solar, and have had a number of industry-leading and, at the time, quite controversial. We talked about clean air, clean jobs. Commissioner Patton mentioned that earlier, but coal plant conversion, emission control projects. So the world is changing a lot around us, and we're helping make that change. Natural gas is an extremely important part of our strategy to reduce emissions, and the low current stable prices of natural gas and a good forward curve are critical to doing that on a going forward basis. I think in our gas business, and we operate a large LDC, but also it includes about 2,400 miles of high pressure pipeline. We're very focused on, first and foremost in a long-term context, in improving the safety and the reliability of our system, and with that, to do that, there's a tremendous amount of renewals and expansions and replacement of older pipe types. But what comes with that is a significant amount of environmental benefit and additional flexibility to serve the needs of the electric industry. The replacement of older pipe types, we've just gotten all of our cast iron out of the ground, but replacing those, installing 24-inch lines or 16-inch lines where we used to have 8 or 12-inch lines provides the line pack and the flexibility that can work with our storage, whether it's our storage that we own and operate, or whether it's upstream on pipeline suppliers like next to me here. All those things have to come together and be planned in order to meet a new world. I'm going to save some of my prepared comments for later, but hopefully you'll ask me a question that fits those. But I will say this, working in electric and gas planning about a decade ago and setting up our first trading operations, I find that with a high level of renewable energy integration, I think it was mentioned that we had 60% of our energy on a Colorado day. It was in the middle of the night at a low load time, but 60% of our energy came from wind. The old world of being able to plan for the design day on the gas system and to be able to think about the line pack that you can build up through the day and what time of day the system peak is early in the morning. We have a whole new set of demands that we're facing, and to have almost 2,000 megawatts of combined cycle generation operating at wildly different levels throughout the day depending upon 2,200 megawatts of wind generation and the 400 megawatts of solar that's either on or coming. Those things, and this is in a self-contained balancing area for an electric system that's not part of the larger footprint of an independent system operator where these operating requirements can be spread across a 100,000 megawatt footprint. Instead, we're doing it on a 7,000. But we have to design and plan the system completely differently and be in a position to be able to have the assets in place so that the panel that was just up here can operate that system and meet our customers' needs. So I look forward to taking questions and being part of the discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Moffitt?
Thank you, Peggy. I'm here today representing not only Kinder Morgan, but also the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. We operate over 200,000 miles of interstate pipeline. My company, Kinder Morgan, operates about 70,000 miles of natural gas-related pipeline. We serve in every region of the country. Some of our pipelines include Natural Gas Pipeline Company of America, Tennessee Gas Pipeline, Southern Natural Gas, El Paso, Colorado Interstate Gas, Ruby into the Northwest. So we cover all of the regions. We're operating in bilateral markets as well as RTOs. I've been asked to come and speak primarily about infrastructure needs through 2030. In the record, we placed the most recent INGA Foundation study on infrastructure needs through 2035. Dan quoted some of the statistics from that this morning. Let me just put it in context for you. Between 2003 and 2013, the industry built 12,400 miles of new pipeline infrastructure. We spent about $5 billion per year, and we added 86.7 BCF per day of capacity. By 2035, natural gas midstream, we estimate will require onshore $270 billion and another $43.7 billion of infrastructure to support LNG. We average $14.2 billion per year through 2035. As far as the size of the mains, our 16-inch add in 2014 to 2020, we estimate will be another 7,500 miles, and 16-inch from 2014 to 2025 will total 12,000. That's inclusive of the prior 7,500. And by 2035, we'll need to add 20,300 miles. The question is, can the industry keep up? Yes, I think our record demonstrates that we can keep up. I started in this industry back when we fought over a penny per quarter increase in the wellhead natural gas price. I'm dating myself. I was in kindergarten at the time.
No, you weren't, because I knew you then.
But we've seen a lot of change since then, and primarily the disaggregation of the commodity from the transport capacity and storage capacity. I thought it was interesting this morning that many of the discussions really devolved to where are the sellers of natural gas, not the pipelines. We're there. Where are the sellers of natural gas over the weekend? If they want to make money, why aren't they there? But anyway, we do raise our capital in the capital markets. We're efficient at doing it, as Lynn said, with long-term contracts. It's a model that's been there for decades, and it's worked reasonably well. Unfortunately, we're not an industry that can build it and ask if they will come. We have a combination of demand that's behind a natural gas project, we then have to go to the FERC, and we have to get a determination that it's needed. We cannot go to the FERC and obtain the certificates to construct and operate our pipelines if we don't have signed up demand. It's a rock bottom issue. It's not just finance, it's the law. We also, however, feel that we can modify our services. I think you've seen us since the 1980s add a lot of new services as market demanded it. With infrastructure comes the ability to provide additional amounts of storage capacity, for example, line pack services, additional balancing services. Pipelines, if they have additional line pack and large systems to operate, are often more comfortable with various types of balancing services and non-ratable take, so that we can offer those services. At bottom, though, I think we have to understand two major things. One, the natural gas pipeline industry serves multiple types of customers. We have the local distribution customers, we have commercial, we have industrial, and now we have an increasing demand in some markets for electricity. We are under the Natural Gas Act required to provide services on a not unduly discriminatory basis. So when we're discussing new ideas and new services for the electric market, the pipelines go to the FERC to try to modify our tariffs. And we often have to battle the other customers on cost allocation, undue preference, even when we are trying to do the communication NOPR at FERC. And Pam Silverberg's in the audience, and she had a big role for that at FERC. We had to deal with and demonstrate that it was not unduly discriminatory to allow operators to talk to each other. But it took us, I think, about 18 months to convince the public and the FERC to permit that rule to go forward. So the other major point that I would like to make is that we have tremendous development risk on our pipelines, which I'll get into in question and answer, I hope.
Thank you. Mr. Carnay.
Thank you.
Carnay, excuse me.
Close enough. Brazos is the oldest and largest generation and transmission cooperative in the state of Texas. We own and operate over 2,000 megawatts of gas-fired generation. We are a very active participant in the Texas ERCOT market, and I also serve on the board of the ISO. I serve on the ERCOT board of directors. We're a large transmission provider in ERCOT. We have over 2,600 miles of transmission line. We provide wholesale power to 16 electric cooperatives.
Can you pull the mic closer to yourself?
Yes, thank you. In 68 counties in North and Central Texas, and serving a little north of Houston and around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Brazos's mission is to provide reliable and affordable electric power to our member cooperatives. This affordability issue is very important to us because in rural areas, a disproportionate number of our member consumers are below the poverty level. We are very accountable to our member owners since they own the organization. Brazos, as well as ERCOT, is very dependent on the natural gas industry for generating power. We have firm and interruptible transportation agreements with multiple major intrastate pipelines. We also have storage contracts to accommodate swings in our delivery so we can match up our generation needs with our gas delivery. During this past winter, we experienced significant problems with natural gas deliveries to our power plants. Most of these problems occurred during the coldest days of this past winter. On 25 days, the gas pipelines limited our hourly deliveries to no greater than our nominated supply for a 24-hour period. And ratable gas flows do not allow you to increase or decrease your generation output in response to electric load on the grid. Let me give you a specific Brazos example. We have 2 peaking combustion turbines at our Miller plant. ERCOT called on these for many of the days for a 4-hour period in the morning to run. Unfortunately, we were required to take ratable gas for the full 24 hours, and that effectively precluded us running those units. So in order to maintain a reliable grid in the future, it's going to be important to have an adequate amount of online capability, or generation capability, that can ramp up and down in real time. And the current pipeline model of ratable flows for a 24-hour period poses big risk and operating challenges that precludes electric generating units attempting to ramp up and down. As the national power grid moves forward into a world with significant coal retirements and higher concentration of intermittent renewable resources like wind and solar, being able to ramp natural gas plants up and down is going to be even more important. In my estimation, given the severe constraints that we experienced this last winter, we're not going to have the flexibility we need. So what do we need? In my opinion, we need three things. We need to fix what we can. We need to grab the low-hanging fruit. And the first thing that I would like to see us do is get the FERC NOPR passed with a 4 a.m. start to the gas day. The second thing is, in an ideal world, we would have an hourly gas market to support an hourly electric market. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. So we need to start looking at a bunch of new services to support the electric grid, such as no-notice service, and especially being able to accommodate non-ratable flows. And the third item we need is we need more capacity. We need more pipeline, and we need more storage. It will be of paramount importance to us as we move forward that in order to continue to have a reliable grid, that we be able to have the natural gas industry provide this kind of operational flexibility. On behalf of Brazos and rural electric cooperatives, we urge the Department of Energy to weigh in on this critical reliability issue, and we thank you for the opportunity to share some comments from the electric cooperative sector.
Thank you. Ms. Mucic?
It's music. Easy.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Little bit.
Southern California Gas Company is the largest LDC in the country. Our customers use about 1 TCF of gas per year. SoCal Gas and San Diego Gas and Electric own and operate an integrated gas transmission system consisting of pipeline and storage facilities. With our network of transmission pipelines and 4 interconnected storage fields, SoCal Gas and SDG&E deliver natural gas to over 6 million residential and business customer meters. The SoCal Gas and SDG&E system complies with the California Public Utility Commission's mandated design standards for core and non-core service. Our system is designed to provide continuous service to core customers. That's our residential and our small commercial and industrial customers. And the design standard for that is a 1 in 35 year peak day. We are also designed to provide continuous service to our larger non-core customers, such as electric generators, through a 1 in 10 cold day. Both of these days are expected to occur during the winter heating season when our core usage is at its greatest. The electric generation market in Southern California is a very important customer segment to SoCal Gas and SDG&E. We're very proud of our service record to this market and have recently proposed several procedural and infrastructure changes which will improve upon that record. The SoCal Gas and SDG&E system has the capacity to serve 6 billion cubic feet per day of customer demand through a combination of pipeline supplies and storage withdrawal. The pipeline network is highly interconnected, which allows us to remove pipelines from service for inspection or repair without severely impacting our operations or service to our customers. Level our system ability to provide these flexibilities to customers is not unlimited. Some level of pipeline supply is always needed on our system. We can't serve it just from our storage facilities, even though we have very substantial storage assets. We have seen periods of low deliveries to our system happen more frequently, such as during the recent cold weather events in the eastern part of the country when supplies were economically diverted to that area. To remedy that, SoCal Gas and SDG&E have proposed changes to our customer balancing service such that customers are incentivized to manage the difference between their usage and supply during times when our system is stressed. We also require a minimum level of pipeline supply to be delivered each day to our southern pipeline system, which runs through Riverside County and serves San Diego and Los Angeles. This is an area of our transmission system that has seen dramatic growth in new electric generation plants, but it's not as well integrated with the rest of our system, and we have very limited ability to supply the southern system with gas delivered in other areas. Compounding this challenge is the fact that SoCalGas and SDG&E offers its customers a multitude of choices for their gas supply, and for economic reasons, customers generally choose to utilize the other supply sources to meet their demand rather than deliver gas supply on the southern system. This places SoCalGas and SDG&E in the position of trying to acquire those supplies on the market or curtailing customer demand if we're not successful. To rectify this, SoCalGas and SDG&E have proposed the construction of a new pipeline that better integrates our southern system with the rest of our gas network and will allow us to move gas supplies to our southern system. This pipeline represents a significant undertaking in terms of scope, cost, and construction, and we've only just begun the regulatory process. In Southern California, local electric generation is primarily fueled by natural gas. SoCalGas and SDG&E serve plants totaling 20,000 megawatts of generating capacity. The use of fuel oil is not permitted by the air quality management districts here, even for backup purposes. And with the advent of a significant percentage of renewable energy sources installed, the electric utilities have begun to deploy quick start electric generating facilities throughout our service territory to compensate for these sudden changes in the renewable sources. This means that several hundred megawatts of natural gas fueled electric generation can go from an offline state to 100% utilization in as little as 7 minutes. This sudden and dramatic change in gas use on our system can create a severe drop in a pipeline's operating pressure, threatening the integrity of our system and service to our customers. To date, we have not found a facility-based solution, such as additional pipeline, to this issue. However, SoCalGas and SDG&E have initiated discussions with plant operators, electric utilities, and the CAISO regarding this challenge and have committed to improving already good communication with these parties in order to avoid pipeline issues while providing service to these quick start facilities. We continue to evaluate this situation and seek our other solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Olson?
He's turning it on behind you.
No, I don't think so. Just get his slides out.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of inviting me to come and speak to this group. My name is Arnie Olson. I'm a partner with Energy and Environmental Economics. I think my role here is going to be a little bit different than some of the other roles. I'm not representing a specific group, but I'm a consultant, and I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've been involved with recently. And I'm going to do this with slides as well. We are just in the process of wrapping up our Western Gas Electric Infrastructure Study that was sponsored by the Western Interstate Energy Board. We had a phase one where we looked at questions of whether there will be adequate natural gas infrastructure. Yep, thank you. In the West, looking out 10 or so years into the future. And our main question there in short is, can some of the issues that have happened in the Northeast, in New England in particular, and New York and the PJM area, is the West vulnerable to some of those same supply disruption and natural gas infrastructure adequacy issues that cause challenges for the electric sector in those areas? And then in phase two, there's been, of course, a large interest in the West at increasing the penetration of wind and solar, variable renewable resources that creates the need for flexible natural gas generation, as Beth described. So will the Western natural gas infrastructure have enough flexibility, both physically, and are the market arrangements and institutions flexible enough? But we need to introduce new products and those kinds of things to manage those flexibility needs. Next slide, please. I want to recognize a number of people in the room today who contributed to the study. Of course, it was sponsored by the Western Interstate Energy Board, a group of Western states and provinces, funded generously by the DOE. And we were assisted by a technical advisory group consisting of Beth Musick and Kinder Morgan and Mike Jensen's here from APS, and Elaine Ginocchio and the other WEEB staff, and the study really wouldn't have been the same without the generous contributions from, and I should mention Northwest Pipeline as well, from all of the pipeline companies and all the members of the TAG. And the Phase 1 report was released on March 17th. Our Phase 2 executive summary is being released today, and our full report will be released on Wednesday. Next slide, please. In our study, we considered a number of different scenarios with the intent of stressing the natural gas infrastructure in the West in ways that it's not stressed today, to see if it can respond adequately to those. Of course, every study has to have a base case, so ours looks at kind of current trends out through 2024. We have a high coal retirements case, where we retired 50% of the remaining coal resources in the region that over and above those that are already scheduled to be retired. So today we have 40 gigawatts of coal in the West. Our scenario had 16 gigawatts of coal in 2024. We looked at a high renewables case where we would end up with 27% renewable portfolio standard effectively throughout the WEC. And we looked at sensitivities on exports, both to Mexico and LNG exports out of the Pacific Northwest. Next slide, please. Our key findings in Phase 1 are that the Western natural gas infrastructure will largely be adequate to meet the needs of the electric sector, except under the most extreme winter weather conditions. Now, all our regions are linked, and the West is a very broad area. This isn't a study of a small area in geography like New England. The West is a vast area with many different supply basins and a large infrastructure to support it. But these regions are all linked together. They're largely planned separately today, but to the extent that there are regional events, cold weather events that affect multiple regions at once, that is an area where there's potential vulnerability in the West. Another potential area is that gas generation that doesn't contract for firm transportation capacity, as we heard earlier this morning, may be subject to interruption. Now, we largely don't have this problem in the West because of our bilateral market structure. In our largest deregulated markets, such as in California, we have a very explicit planning standard that takes into consideration the needs of the electric generators. So in that area, we have adequate transportation capacity as well. But if you are relying on a gas generator that doesn't have that firm fuel, that generator might not be firm, might not be there when you need it to be. But of course, to the extent that our natural gas needs will continue to grow, we'll need to continue to expand the Western natural gas infrastructure. The picture I have up here is of our coal retirements case. And on the left-hand side is historical natural gas demand throughout the WEC region. You can see it kind of bounces around a lot, but it's largely been flat for the last 10 or 12 years. And our base case projects that to be largely flat going out for the next 10 or 12 years, largely because of the increase in renewable generation on the electric side. The red area, the red wedge, is the increase in gas demand caused by the retirement of 23 gigawatts of coal resources. So you can see it's a noticeable increase in gas demand in the West, but it's not one that's out of character with the types of increases that we've seen in the past. So we believe this can be accommodated, and our market arrangements are adequate to do that. And then the next slide is Phase 2, and our key finding in Phase 2 is that increased variability in gas demand that are caused by higher renewables, while it does create challenges that need to be managed on an operating day basis, but that overall it appears that there are no technical barriers to doing that. And in fact, if you superimpose renewable resources on top of a system that doesn't have them, the overall effect is to reduce gas demand, reduces gas throughput. That provides the pipeline operators with increased flexibility, increased operating range to use storage and line pack to manage those variable flows. So if you can see the pictures on the right show the results of one of our simulations, where it shows operating pressures under the base case are more challenging than the ones under the high renewables case, which are the ones in orange, because as the solar and wind energy comes online, it allows the gas generation to back off, which allows the pipeline to be recharged and the line pack to be recharged, thereby providing the flexibility that the pipeline needs.
Okay, thank you all for your summary statements. Let's just jump right in. What I heard your panel, what your comments say is that reliability and safety are number one, and yet you have a real need for flexible service. So how does improving infrastructure answer that, and how does that, what are the steps to getting to that scenario? Mr. Eves?
Want me to start?
Yeah. So what infrastructure solutions do you have that result in safety, reliability, and flexibility?
So, we undertake this in two modes. One, on our own system, where it's improvements to the LDC or our transmission facilities. But the second mode would be working with upstream suppliers on their storage, contracting for storage, or the improvements and the capacity contracts that we're going to enter into. So the things that can and should be done and that we are doing is replacing older facilities, upsizing facilities, we're reducing methane emissions, we are increasing the safety of the system as we modernize the infrastructure, but we're also building the capability, couple it with storage, but we're building the larger facilities that have the line pack and the additional flexibility. So basically increasing the flexibility and the capability of the infrastructure, which hand in hand increases safety.
Mr. Moffitt?
I would emphasize the same for the upstream interstate pipelines. We're under the jurisdiction of the PHMSA, and we had a recent reauthorization that required even greater inspection, use of new technology on inline tools. So on our routine maintenance, which is not included in the numbers I quoted earlier, but on routine maintenance, we are repairing systems, we are constantly refurbishing, we're taking out and replacing compressors on a regular basis. All of that increases safety, all of it does increase reliability. One of the challenges that we've all noted is there's a tremendous amount, well, really from the mid-continent over to the East Coast, tremendous shifts in how the systems are being used, so that the demand on various systems is different than it was for the prior 20 years, for example. We're finding compressor stations that have not been utilized in some number of years that are now being retrofitted to reverse flow, to take gas south, for example, from the Marcellus, or to take increased flow out of the Marcellus midway in our system northeast. We're now building west. Everything's going to Chicago and will disperse as it has over the years. So all of that adds reliability and safety. As I mentioned earlier, increased infrastructure as well, new added infrastructure, whether it's in terms of compression, larger pipe when you're replacing pipe, or building new pipe, you have more capacity, more line pack, more flexibility to work with in trying to meet shifting demands on different parts of our system.
Mr. Carney?
So when I look at this, I obviously approach this from the electric grid standpoint. And being from Texas, we're sitting on a lot of gas, we're sitting on a lot of pipe, so you would think everything would be good in Texas. Not so. So the three things I think we need to do is we need to look at synchronizing, as was discussed in the earlier panel, the scheduling of the gas day and the electric day. I think the FERC NOPR is well thought out, well reasoned, and a great start in that process. I think we have to get access in the electric industry to more notice service, more non-ratable flows. That's a big concern of ours. We're looking at developing additional generation in ERCOT, and that's one of the things we're looking at very closely. And then long-term, to make sure that we can actually deliver when we have these cold winter days, and it's primarily a winter phenomenon in Texas. We're going to need more pipe and more storage. I know we've got a big discussion about who pays, but fundamentally, that's what we're going to need. That's the third piece.
Thank you. Miss Mucic, I cannot say your name. I am sorry.
It's just music like a song.
Music,
Yeah,
thank you.
It's really
Thank
easy.
you.
Anyway, yeah, so as far as safety goes, California, I think, is on the forefront of the pipeline safety issues, and we had a decision recently from the California Public Utilities Commission that will allow us to hydro test or replace some of our older lines. And, you know, our system is highly piggable, so we are very concerned about safety. It's job one at our company, and so I think we do a very good job with that. As far as reliability goes, because we have slack capacity on our system, and that's part of the planning standard from the California Public Utilities Commission, our customers are blessed with pretty liberal balancing rules, much more so, it sounds like, than what you're dealing with. And we also have substantial storage assets. We have 137 billion cubic feet of storage, and we can withdraw over 3 BCF in a day. So I think it's a good situation for our customers, the electric generators, and the other customers on our system. I think we've done a pretty good job of dealing with that.
Thank you. Mr. Olson?
I would say the number one thing and I've looked at this mostly from an electric sector perspective as well, but the number one thing is to make sure if you're relying on a generator to provide electric service, that generator either has firm transportation capacity, has firm fuel, either natural gas or backup fuel. It seems really simple if you think about it from a reliability perspective, and where I come from, you know, it seems simple, but it's not. Then the second thing is the one scenario that we found with the high renewable penetration that can get you in trouble is if there's forecast error. So with solar, you know, you kind of know a day ahead that the sun's going to shine, and you have a good sense of what your demands are going to be over the course of a day. But you may not have that sense over, you know, 1 or 2 hours ahead. With wind, it's a little bit more difficult. So, you know, I think there is going to be increasing pressure on moving from a day ahead to, you know, more near term, and I don't know if it's all the way to hourly, but more pressure on the kind of 4-hour ahead, 8-hour ahead, 12-hour ahead kind of scheduling time frames, and more flexibility in the market arrangements that allow you to move that generation around in time as necessitated by the renewables.
Let's talk about that a little more. Just generally, could you all give me your comments on how the increase of renewables on the system is impacting your system, your forecasting, your plans for new infrastructure? And what are you looking at? How is it impacting you?
So we've added very significant amounts of renewables. We have 4,500 megawatts of wind across 3 systems, and about 400 megawatts of solar, and now we're significantly increasing the solar. The wind has had a significant impact on a lot of things, but in particular it's required a flexible natural gas system to support on a firm basis with the NNT, with the delivery flexibility to support the gas peaking and combined cycle generation that is so important to go with the wind energy. That's not to say that utilities won't, and we certainly have modified and improved the ability of coal plants to regulate and even cycle on and off over weekends or for a week or two, to make changes in the way you operate other facilities. Like we had a peak pump storage facility that used to be basically an economic differential between, you know, surplus energy at night from coal generation and peak prices in the day. It's now basically a wind backup plant, and it's driven that way. So there's a lot of other changes that can happen and need to happen, but the single most important change to accommodate, you know, significant amounts of renewable energy is flexible natural gas generation. Because of the low heat rate penalty, the flexibility that it has, the quicker start time, stop times, cycling capability, and so on. The one other thing I would say, I always find that when we have this discussion, we think about changes the gas industry needs to make to meet the electric industry's needs, and it's not just, it has to work the other way too. For example, progressive areas of the country that have implemented structured energy markets, and we heard from some earlier on the earlier panel, give the utilities in those regions, the electric utilities, the flexibility to spread that regulating and response to changes with wind in one region or another, or loss of other kinds of resources. You can spread that, if you can spread that over 100,000 or 50,000 megawatt footprint, instead of having, you know, one of the 35 balancing areas in the WAC trying to do that on their own, that makes a huge difference. Likewise, we need to work, the electric generators need to look upstream to the gas industry and contract for flexible delivery, not only to each plant, but to be able to move that capacity if we've purchased an NNT flexibility, move it around to different resources, because they're effectively, through the day, they're substitutes for each other. They work as a combined plant, much like we'd look at an electric load on the system that moves through the city, and we treat it like one customer, like a light rail system. And that's the way the power plants are.
Mr. Moffett?
I think, first of all, looking across all of our pipelines, it's obviously very regional. I think the bottom line is that we have seen the need for increased natural gas-fired generation as a backup to increase very slowly. I think that may be partly because the ramp-up of various forms of renewable energy have been somewhat more modest than perhaps some of the expectations might have been. We also, though, see in the natural gas industry quite an impact of efficiency, such that we have a fair amount of efficiency gains within the natural gas commercial, industrial, and residential use. We think there'll also be not one-for-one replacement of all coal-fired power plants, in part because of efficiency. So we're factoring that in. To date, I wouldn't say it's been overwhelming. However, if you look at the INGA study, we do, when we look out more, see much more demand for laterals to connect electric generation. How much of that is backup peaking for intermittent power, and how much is replacement baseload? I don't have that breakdown. But we're seeing a mix of both on our systems.
Thank you.
So in Texas, it's always about the response to the market. And what we've seen, we currently have 12,000 megawatts of wind generation in the state of Texas. We've seen that cause a significant reduction in wholesale prices of electricity, which has caused people to, when they've looked at resource additions, primarily look at peaking plants as opposed to combined cycles, because they don't run very often, and you have the ability to start and stop. Under the Clean Power Plan that was mentioned earlier, one of the building blocks EPA did was additional renewables. If that plan goes into place, we're going to have to increase our renewables from 16,000 megawatts to 28,000 megawatts by 2030. That's going to put even more downward pressure on wholesale prices, particularly in the spring and the fall, which I think is going to drive the market to build even more peaking capacity and less combined cycle, which is going to put even more stress and strain on the natural gas pipeline and storage system when we get into one of these cold weather periods and we need to push the button on a peaking plan at 6 in the morning and run it till 10 in the morning.
Ms. Music.
Got it. Okay. In the written materials that I sent you, I provided the results of some of our hydraulic modeling that we've looked at, where we've looked at what kind of pressure drops we can see on our system, where you add one quick start unit versus 3 quick start units versus, a traditional electric generator. And, because this is what we're seeing in California, pretty much every unit that's coming on in California now, whether it's a peaking plant or a combined cycle, is a quick start unit. And so what we found is if you have one unit and it's isolated from everything else, you tend to not have that much of a problem. But when you start grouping them together, such as in the LA Basin, we've seen our hydraulic modeling has shown that you could have a 70 PSIG pressure drop in about 15 minutes. So if you're in gas control and you're watching your pressure, go completely down, you don't know that it's going to bottom out and you're going to be okay. And so it's causing us to change the way the natural gas system is run, and it's causing issues that we're trying to grapple with and deal with, because this is clearly the way the world is going. So the natural gas industry is going to have to deal with that.
One of the things we found that comes back to the differences thing that we've heard, I think, kind of throughout the morning, but we looked at various different parts of the West, and the way that they treat these issues are different because of the way that the gas systems are structured. In California, as Beth mentioned, and in the Northwest, the balancing rules are very liberal. These areas have a lot of storage, natural gas storage, that they can use to help with the balancing. So there's never been the economic pressure and the requirements to have stricter balancing rules. The counterexample to that is El Paso in the Southwest, which the geology there just doesn't really support storage, so there isn't any. That's also an area where has historically relied on natural gas peaking resources to help meet these needle peaks in electric demand. So it's an area that's very familiar with variable use of natural gas. Natural gas use for electric generation, that's not ratable, that varies rated dramatically throughout the day. So what they've done is develop market products that allow them to position a pipeline through line pack to meet those needle peaks in electric demand. So that's an example of how this variability can be managed with a fixed pipeline infrastructure if the right market structures are in place. And this is kind of the most extreme example because there isn't any this natural storage that's available to help with that. So this is an example that other regions, I think, can look to as that they need to develop more strict balancing rules for themselves.
Did you have a follow-up? No. I want to ask you a little more about regional differences. If you could speak to what is going on in your region to address the issue of adequate supply of electricity and gas. Are there coalitions, partnerships? I asked the first panel about the public-private partnerships, the role of the federal government in those, but there may already be regional efforts that we are either not involved in or not aware of. So I know, Kurt, you have a national perspective from INGA, but wondered if you all could talk about your regions and what is going on collaboratively within the industry. Sure.
Well, thank you. Let me just pick. I'll pick three. As mentioned, in the Southwest, we have accommodated a lot of uneven load for a long time. It is a challenge because there's no storage to speak of. And quite frankly, across the country, we're seeing it difficult to develop storage. Again, it goes back to the financials because there's so much flowing gas. And there's not much basis between price points that people are not parking gas, they're not storing it for any type of arbitrage purpose. So to try to develop new storage fields right now, we need market demand from traditional buyers of storage. And as we see, if they're not willing to buy firm transport, they're not likely to buy firm storage. So that's sort of connected. In the Southeast, takes SNG, for example, Entergy, certainly the southern companies, they're bilateral markets. They function extremely well. They've had a fair amount of penetration of natural gas there in history. Florida is another good example. It's a bilateral market. It's at the end of the line. It's a peninsula, but it gets the demand it needs because it's backed by firm contracts with the PUC supportive and flow through of those costs. The Northeast is a totally different story. The so-called organized markets have various incentives built in, and the ISOs each seem to be different that put pressure on people signing up for firm capacity. But firm capacity is what's needed even there. The geology doesn't support indigenous storage to the Northeast. So all storage to support the Northeast has to get transported. And it has to get transported through the most difficult development area across New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, into Massachusetts, We have our Northeast Direct project on Tennessee. It's a 1.2 billion cubic feet a day project, could expand if we built a 36 to 2.2 BCF. People mentioned in 2003 to 2008, we had tremendous shale pipes built. They were subscribed to by producers. It was between one set of boards of directors and another. You struck a deal, you struck a contract, you built it. Northeast is the first market pull with LDC primarily anchoring the pipe. Totally different ballgame. We're back into the 1970s and 80s, and they have to look over their shoulder to their PUC. So it's a totally different process. And we also have tremendous development risk. Once we get an economic deal with our customers, we have all of the challenges to getting our permits done, all of the people who don't want a pipeline in their backyard. It's a very difficult process to build a pipeline these days, and I'll be glad to talk about that in the wrap-up.
Good. Regional efforts in Colorado, Mr. Reeves?
Have done multiple studies in ERCOT because of our high dependence on natural gas, of the risk of curtailments in a cold weather event, either from freezing on the gas infrastructure, or possibility, we talked about this earlier, of being in rotating outages and actually cutting off the electricity on a rotating basis to gas compression stations, and what's the domino impact of that. We did a study on that a couple of years ago. We're in the process of updating that. The thing I'm concerned about now is I'm not sure it goes far enough. If you look at the Clean Power Plan, there are multiple units in the base case of the Clean Power Plan in ERCOT that are planned to be shut down by 2020. So if we're going to get on top of this, we really have between now and 2020, assuming those assumptions are right and that plan goes into place, to make sure we've got enough infrastructure to support what we need, because we're at risk of losing a lot of coal plants in ERCOT.
Thank you. In California?
Yes, so as far as the coalitions or partnerships, I think the issue of gas and electric, keeping both of them up is very near and dear to my heart. And we had a couple of real life examples of that this winter, both in December and in February. In February, we ended up in a curtailing end-use customers, and that was the electric generation. It was very important to us to be able to hold up the electric as well as the gas, and the way we were able to do that was because of our partnership with the California Independent System Operator as well as the other local balancing agencies. We worked with them really closely on that day, and as we do every day, to make sure that they had enough natural gas-fired generation to keep up the electric grid. And absent that coordination, I'm fairly certain that we would have lost something, maybe probably the electric grid in that situation. So that partnership, and that, as I said, that's happening every day that we coordinate with them. And I think it's actually vital to both sides of the, and so I think California is a good example of how that can work.
Great. Mr. Reeves?
I guess when I look at electricity industry, natural gas industry in a operating mode and coordination mode, and in a long-term planning mode, the long-term planning of the gas industry is probably the least coordinated within any region. I mean, it's done more bilaterally. Just the nature of electricity and the way everything flows across each other's facilities requires more centralized coordinated planning between all the interconnected companies. We just don't operate that way when we go out way into the future, and pipelines are competing with each other, and they'd like to sell capacity to the LDCs and generators, and so we do it more transactionally. I don't know what kind of opportunity there is, but if anything would drive the potential for more regional coordination, it might be the Clean Power Plan. I mean, it's going to create a significant impact on many, many states in terms of the amount of gas generation that needs to be added in the future of our current coal plants. So it could be that there's something there, but my sense is that we operate pretty much you know, as utilities, we operate under the oversight of our state regulators, PEMSA from a safety standpoint, but from a planning standpoint, our state regulators oversee that, whereas electricity, there's a lot more FERC oversight.
Thank you. Mr. Olson?
In the West, it's largely a regional issue, and you heard Beth talk about the things that California has done. That's one of our sort of geography-constrained load pockets where they've been very concerned about these issues. It's also a jurisdiction where, you know, everyone's kind of under the same jurisdiction in the same backyard, so they have a long history of working very closely with each other. The other geographically constrained region is the Pacific Northwest, and I think you heard Lynn Dahlberg mention the effort that's been going on there under the auspices of the Pacific Northwest Utilities Conference Committee, PNUCC, and the Northwest Gas Association. That's kind of a similar circumstance where it's an area that's constrained by geography with now, you know, heavy reliance on natural gas to meet peaking needs. It's also a region that has a winter peak both on gas and on power. So they've been very, very concerned about these issues of natural gas deliverability. And where we haven't seen as much effort, I think, is west-wide, and that's one of the things that our study has indicated is a vulnerability. We've done pretty well in the West looking regionally. We haven't done that well looking at kind of west-wide weather events, and they do come in occasionally, and there could be a cold spell that sets in over the West, and that's where you might have things like well freeze-offs that can contribute to reliability events, and so that's probably an area where it might be beneficial to do more work regionally in the future.
Thank you. So let's turn to the QER now. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the first panel, and that is, what one critical recommendation would you put forward to the task force today? Remembering that the task force is grappling not only with what the industry's roles and responsibilities are, but what the federal government's role and responsibility is. So why don't we mix it up? And Mr. Olson, why don't you start with your one recommendation to the QER task force?
Well, the title of this panel is Infrastructure Needs Through 2030, which is kind of a long way out there, but when you start to think about 2030, that's pretty close to 2035, and it starts to get close to 2040, and when you're in 2040, you're not that far from 2050. And 2050, if anyone has been following sort of longer-term climate issues, is a big milestone for you know, a lot of the efforts that have gone on the global negotiations, and the target of, you know, reaching, if we're going to reach 2 degrees Celsius of warming, that that the greenhouse gas emissions reductions will need to reach levels of 80% below what they were in 1990. So we can continue to plan for 2030 as if the world ended there, but I think that would be a big mistake. And I think it's time that some of these efforts that look at 2050 in isolation and these efforts that look at now to 2030, we don't have the golden spike yet. Right? They've kind of taken place in isolation now. But at some point we need to start building bridges between them and start to think about what the world looks like in 2035 and 2040 and whether that's the right path long term or not.
Thank you very much.
I would echo the sentiments of the NASB representative as far as recognizing the importance of the interconnectedness between gas and electric. You really cannot look at one without the other. They just really interplay, especially in places like California where so much of the electric generation is dependent on natural gas. So I think that you need to look at them and make sure that the coordination between the two is prominent in what you're looking at.
So do you mean in terms of R&D, the federal role of looking at the two industries together?
So I think you hinted at earlier, you were talking about, you know, sometimes the natural gas can go down because you lose an electric compressors. And the same thing can happen. You can lose the electric because you've lost natural gas. And that was, you know, we lost supply to natural gas, and that had a huge impact on the electric. And so I think you have to look at all those factors, the infrastructure adequacy, the supply adequacy, not just infrastructure, but supply. You need to have both. I guess you could have lots of pipe and have it empty, and you're not really helping yourself any. And so just how are we going to do the very best job we can to hold up both sides of that coin?
Okay.
I
Mr. Carney?
I love what Beth said, but I think that's such a big issue. I'm looking for something that we can get a stake in the ground and execute on, and I would ask the QER to support the FERC NOPR. The FERC NOPR revisions include starting the natural gas day at 4 a.m., moving the timely nomination cycle later, increasing the number of intraday nomination opportunities to help shippers adjust their scheduling, and we believe as cooperatives at Brazos that this is very thorough, well thought out, and it's a good first step to starting this coordination process.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back purely as Kurt Moffitt and not a representative of anyone today to when we thought of the Department of Energy and the Carter administration, and there's a provision in the DOE Organization Act where DOE can propose a rule to the FERC. The FERC is required to consider it, not necessarily adopt it, but consider it. And it was exactly these types of issues, particularly, for example, ideas on appropriate rate design on non-ratable take. What is the dynamic necessary to provide for a 4-hour take as opposed to 1/24th, which is how we design our systems and allocate costs. That's something that the resources of the department were thought to have more resources to gather data, refine options and ideas, and propose a rule to FERC. The Congress and the administration recognized that as a regulatory agency constantly engaged in on-the-record proceedings, it was much more difficult and more limited resources at the FERC to undertake some of these policy initiatives, and that was the idea of the part of the dotted line to FERC. The other had to do with budget, but there is this rulemaking provision. It's been used, I think, once by Spencer Abraham in recent memory. It was used a little bit more often right after the DOE was organized, but it's sort of fallen by the board. So I think the QER has a tool available. It'll be interesting to see if they choose to use it.
Thank you.
So my recommendation may be a little bit out in right field, and I agree with what you've heard across the panel. But the one thing I would add to that is I look at the federal government, well, particularly the FERC, and you could ask anyone in the industry about their policy around transmission and competitive wholesale markets, and we all know about the incentives and so much work and direction that's gone into advocating that. This is hard for me to say next to my biggest pipeline supplier, but I think encouraging cost recovery, not just at the federal level with interstate pipelines, but across states with the intrastates with the LDC to make the investments that are needed and to get ahead of this and build a system that has the additional capability and flexibility, but also, like we talked about earlier, the safety and the reliability. I mean, these facilities are getting very old. There's a need to do this anyway, and we definitely see the push from PEMSA. We see it on the regulatory side in terms of what we need to comply with, but I think we're all going to have to invest more and more capital in this, and we can do it in a way that's going to build a better, more flexible system that then alignment of the gas day, improved operations, all those other things can take advantage of those facilities. So that's not to say, Curtis, that we're not going to have something to say about your next rate case, but anyway.
Well, let's talk about financing a little bit. It's been talked about on the first panel. you've certainly raised it, and what's the impact of access to capital markets? Is there money out there to invest in infrastructure? If there is, what are the challenges to accessing it? How does that play with the topic of this panel, which is infrastructure needs and challenges? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I guess as the pipeline representative that is projected to raise $313 billion, I would say that the most important thing is to have credit-worthy customers that are signing contracts that cover the basic costs and debt service of your project. Then it's between us and our board of directors on the equity component, which we're obviously going to have some return on equity. But whether it's a consortium of companies that get together with some type of parental guarantees behind supply, I don't think that really matters to the pipeline. It may have issues with the FERC. It may be another area you want to look at because of the capacity release rules and how they nominate and schedule capacity within the consortium. But I think I speak for all the pipelines that we look for credit-worthy parties, and once that credit's established, and if it's a new venture consortium, it may be through different types of guarantees and letters of credit. But I don't think the pipeline industry has any difficulty in accessing the markets. But our lenders do look at our contracts, and they do look up behind us as to who the contracting parties are and what is their credit.
Thank you.
Not being in the gas side, I haven't financed any pipe recently or ever, but I would echo what Curtis said. I think there's a tremendous amount of interest out there with lenders if you have facilities, any facility backed up by credit-worthy purchasers with long-term contracts.
I would just echo. Sorry, Beth.
Okay, no problem. For us, obviously, it's a little bit of a different situation because we are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, and it's our ratepayers who have to pay for any infrastructure improvements. We did file our application for a major pipeline in our system recently, last December, and I can tell you that our ratepayers are very sensitive to paying more money, and they want to make sure that before they pay that money, there's a good reason why they need to pay increased rates. So, but it's always an issue for us, is, you know, trying to convince them that we need to have additional infrastructure. It's a challenge.
Thank you. Mr.
I
Olson?
was going to note that I think the experience overall in the West has been that the recourse to captive ratepayers to finance very long-term investments is really important. That's what establishes that credit-worthy counterparty so that gas infrastructure can be expanded to meet the needs of the electric sector. And in regions where that hasn't been there, that's where I think we've seen the issues.
Any thoughts on financing?
I think we share, Colorado or California, the same thing. It's really rate recovery, rate impacts to our customers, so we can access the capital. It's really a matter of finding that right balance. And I know our commission in Colorado, and increasingly I think across the country, have allowed pipeline system integrity adjustment type, that's what we call our clause. And we work with their staff on an annual plan to develop the right amount of pipe type replacement, new lines, et cetera. So.
Well, let me give you all a chance to provide some final thoughts to the task force and tell us what gaps in these issues we've missed in our discussion here today. I think it's been a good one. Mr. Reeves, why don't you start, because you said you had some other things you wanted to talk about.
I think the one thing I would add to the discussion we've had, and I may have just started to touch on it, is I've heard people joke about natural gas being an input fuel for making electricity, and frankly, the interrelationship between these two industries and the amount of levers and modifications to the market structure, to the way we sell electricity, the way we deliver it, considering the provision of firm versus interruptible electric service, to the gas infrastructure, to the compressors, et cetera. It's a continual circle, and it works equally both ways. I think it's really important to include that the Department of Energy should incorporate consideration of enhancements and changes in the electric market that can provide a benefit back to or maybe reduce the demands for instantaneous natural gas service the way that we'd like to have it. Natural gas is never going to flow like electricity. It's an instant business versus something that you build up and send down a line, and it takes a long time for it to get there. So I don't know that we get to 5-minute gas markets like we're headed to, like we have in electricity. But you can change the way we sell electricity. You can create more demand response programs. You can create interruptible programs. You can do more things on the demand side and the supply side, and with other electric resources and bigger markets, bigger footprints, organized ISOs and structured markets that have a significant change in the demand on this gas infrastructure and the operations of the gas system. So I like to think of them as kind of siblings instead of one serving the other. So that's it, my comment.
Thank you. Mr. Moffitt?
Again, being here to talk about infrastructure construction, I mentioned earlier development cost risk. I think another area that DOE we hope to be the advocate for the energy industry. It's one thing to have Gina McCarthy talk about needing more natural gas infrastructure on the one hand as part of their greenhouse gas initiative, but then her branches comment on EISs in a not helpful way the very next day. It defies me why the Department of Energy cannot, within the executive branch, coordinate better the choices that are being made by DOI in the case of federal lands, EPA in the case of EPA's comments on NEPA documents, CEQ, and Department of Transportation, which is going to be making tremendous amount of decisions on pipeline safety and integrity standards. We're all for safety, but there are choices as to how dependent you are on hydrostatic testing, for example, versus use of other data that's reliable from inline tools. So just a few examples, but I think DOE can play a much stronger coordinating role within the department.
Thank you.
I mean, within the administration, sorry.
In my opening remarks, I mentioned my big three: support the FERC NOPR, somehow get to more of a gas market that looks more hourly like the electric market with additional services, and number three, we need more capacity, more pipe, more storage. But my concluding remarks are going to be that when you look at the Clean Power Plan, particularly in Texas, it's going to be a redo of our grid. We need to start planning now for what our grid looks like in 2020, because it's going to have much more renewables, much less coal, and therefore we're going to need a lot more gas. So that's what we need to start planning for, is a different type of grid coming in 2020 to 2030. And I think we're going to have to do the same thing on the gas side, not only how the market's structured, what services are offered. And I guess my parting comment here is I want to make sure we're not underestimating this effort in front of us in the next 5 to 7 years.
So I just want to make sure that you do focus on the challenges that the gas system is going to be facing as these renewables come online and the ramping issues associated with that. And also ask that you would encourage and support that relationship between the gas and the electric side that I've talked about a number of times. I can tell you that establishing that relationship when you're not under stress is key, because when you are under stress, you don't have time for all the niceties. You have to trust each other. You have to understand both sides, and because you have to make decisions very quickly. So that support of that relationship is important. Thank you.
And when are those industries ever not under stress?
Yeah, good point.
I'm kind of struck by, I'm feeling a little bit bipolar because there's sort of two very, very different focuses of the discussion this morning. One of them is very, very long term, and one of them is very, very short term. And so we've kind of been focused on both. And the longer term needs are through 2030 and beyond. Will we continue to replace coal generation with natural gas generation, thereby increasing the demand for natural gas and the need for new pipeline, new natural gas infrastructure? How long will that continue? Will at some point the demand for natural gas begin to decline as we get more and more serious about carbon reduction later in the century? When and how soon does that start? At some point, we'll be at the point where we need to have, we're reaching the economic lifetime of the investments that we're making now. And we'll need to start to have more and more certainty about the future of those investments. Now, the good news is that for this industry that, my firm has been doing some really interesting work that shows that there might be an interesting future for the natural gas industry to supply a blended supply, including introducing more hydrogen into the supply, introducing sources of biogas, possibly doing things that are even more interesting like power to gas, taking advantage of this big infrastructure that we've built and using it to help balance some of the issues on the electric grid as it's already doing today. So there is a long-term future that is interesting and worth thinking about. Then we have this very, very near-term focus on solving these issues around the variability, some of which is caused by the increase in renewables, some of which is just already there anyway due to the challenges of supplying this commodity to an electric sector that needs to be balanced on an instantaneous basis. And those things are very serious and need to be addressed as well. And I think there are a lot of efforts going on there. As we heard today, there still isn't really consensus about what needs to be done on those, and I hope that the industry can get there soon.
Well, thank you all. I think we've learned a lot about the infrastructure challenges and certainly many of the solutions articulated here. Thank you all for joining us. Let's give them all a great round of applause. It's rare that we're running a little ahead of schedule, but we are, so let's just move forward and set up for the open mic session. And I would ask the DOE staff to come forward. Natalie, Karen is not staying, so don't put out her 10 card. Kate is not going to sit up there. So can someone give me the list of speakers? Thank you. So now we turn to the portion of our meeting where we hear from attendees. For those of you that are watching live streaming, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you as well. So please submit written comments. Really, truly, they are read in detail and considered very seriously. So I'm going to do it one more time. The address is QERcomments@hq.doe.gov. For those of you in the room, we have two speakers who have signed up today. But before we hear from them, let me introduce our Department of Energy panel. To my left is Chani Vines. She's a senior advisor in the Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis. Matthew McGovern, also in the Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis, is a special advisor, and Levi Tilleman in that same office as senior advisor. All three of these people are spending night and day working on the QER. It is not a 9-to-5 process. Very dedicated federal public servants.
But Peggy, just Matt is senior and I'm special.
Oh, all right. So noted. So with that, let me ask our first speaker to come up to the standing mic in the aisle, and that is Brad Bullion. Brad, we have the timer on, and you have 5 minutes.
Well, I won't take 5 minutes. Is this on?
Speak closely into the microphone.
I have only a couple of comments. I had more, but I'm getting old now.
So you can submit them as written.
I will. I did write that down. The two observations I had was during the discussions, there was comments related to the gas day start. I'm Brad Bullion. I'm representing the California ISO. And there was multiple gas day starts, and I wanted to just reiterate that California ISO was the one ISO that accepted all of the gas day start times, because we believe that you can look at other issues and other solutions, and the gas day start is really just, it's not the crux of the problem, it's one of the symptoms that we're seeing. The second one was a discussion on regionality, and unique principles involved in the markets. And in California, we actually have the gas cycle, the nomination cycle close, and then we immediately start our day-ahead market for the next day. And our participants like that structure because it gives them price certainty when bidding into the market, and that's because of two conditions. It's because that California, we have deliverability certainty on the gas side, a function of what you heard earlier, and also that we have stability in our day-ahead market. Our day-ahead market is highly representative of what our real-time solution is. So there's very little variability between the day-ahead and the real-time markets. So these two conditions, I don't want to consider them unique to all to the California versus other ISOs, but the way that we have it set up, it's a condition. Given the conditions we have, it's a solution that works. And I'm encouraging this investigation or this discussion to say, okay, there's more than one way to be right here. There's not one solution, because not everybody has the same conditions in their market that are precipitating solutions. So people are trying to solve the problems and move forward, and you hear a lot of discussions on that. And I think that when you look at California's market, our renewables penetration is very high. Our growth in renewables is extremely high. We have no coal. We're over 2/3 gas-fired. We're 68% gas-fired. So, I mean, there are things that are in our market that I think the rest of the country is heading towards. And I encourage us to learn, because we make mistakes as we go along, but I hope other people don't repeat those mistakes, so that we all learn and we all leverage the learnings to make the process less painful for people that are moving along slightly behind us or right in lockstep with us, but just not to those percentages yet. That's all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Pam Silberstein.
I'm Pam Silberstein with the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Thought it was two great panels. I want to thank the DOE for putting this together. And to the three of you and your colleagues, I know how hard you are working. I've had conversations with your colleagues at nights and on weekends, so it's going to be a long summer, but you will. Just schedule your vacations for next February. I think one thing that that I was thinking about was, I think it was in 1978, and maybe this is somewhere around when DOE was created, but there was a Fuel Use Act that actually really sharply restricted, if not outright prohibited, the use of natural gas for electricity. And that's, in the scheme of things, not that long ago, and I just wanted to point that out, well, in my mind. in our minds, not that long ago. So this incredible revolution that and of course everyone knows the shale gale is just a creature of really the 21st century. So the changes have been very, very fast, very rapid, and everybody's running in place to keep up. In terms of something that I think is incredibly important for the QER to undertake, and to echo something that Kurt said, and I'm not just calling him out because he called me out, but the fact that one of the 4 building blocks of the EPA greenhouse gas 111D regs does really depend on gas-fired generation replacing so much of the coal. Mr. Olson was talking about looking out past 2030 to 2050, but that's the near-term issue. I mean, that's in the next 2, 5, 7 years. And I think, people like to say, what keeps you up at night? I think that's what should be keeping us up at night. Kurt mentioned in passing the difficulty of building interstate gas pipelines right now. I mean, one thing that the Natural Gas Act has that the Federal Power Act does not have is the Natural Gas Act does give FERC this siting authority, and once a pipe has a certificate, it can go ahead and condemn and whatever. I mean, the electric side can't do that for transmission, but even with that, the process of building pipe is painful, long, and expensive. And if we are just having this confluence of issues where we need to get a lot more gas infrastructure built now to accommodate the impact of the whatever changes come about as a result of the EPA regs, I think it's a potentially scary future out there. I think, as many of you probably know, the House Energy and Commerce Committee is holding a hearing tomorrow to which all 5 FERC commissioners have been invited / commanded to appear, and that is the very topic. So that's really something that I think it's part of the President's Climate Action Plan, the QER, but there does need to be more coordination between federal agencies that get siloed and really are almost working at cross purposes to each other. So,
Thank you. So that is the conclusion of our open mic session. Let me turn the floor over to Matt McGovern.
Well, first, was there anyone else in the audience that wanted to speak today that we didn't get?
Doug Larson, Western Interstate Energy Board, but these views are my own. The concern that Arnie raised about the long-term view, I think is really important for the QER to pay attention to. Also, the QER needs to pay attention to the question of whether methane leakage, in fact, is going to cause natural gas to be a more greenhouse or highly greenhouse gas intensive fuel, not unlike coal. Because if that is the case, then our worries about gas infrastructure are probably misplaced. So my suggestion would be the QER pay close attention to the issue of methane leakage and its effect on greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, well, we'll just wrap up. I first just want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank you to our panelists for putting together your presentations and traveling to this meeting and giving the DOE the input that's so important for the QER process. Also want to thank all the DOE and energetic staff who helped put this meeting together, and thank the Auraria Higher Education Center and Metro State University staff who've helped put the meeting together and host us here and live stream the event online. We are still taking comments on our website, energy.gov, hq.doe.gov/QER. You can also email them to QERcomments@hq.doe.gov. We've got several other meetings coming up. Our next meeting is in Chicago on August 8th on rail, barge, and truck transportation. The same day, August 8th, we'll also be in Bismarck, North Dakota for a meeting on Bakken infrastructure constraints. After that, we'll be in Santa Fe for state, local, and tribal issues. That's August 11th. August 21st, we'll be back in Cheyenne to discuss infrastructure siting. And the next one after that is in Newark on September 8th. That's for electricity transmission, storage, and distribution, focusing on the eastern states. So we've got several more meetings coming up. All the information about our past meetings and meetings coming up is on energy.gov/QER. And with that, we'll wrap up today. Thanks, everybody.
Which we might want to think about changing. Or I think then it gets excessive.
Oh, thank you. And it was fantastic meeting you. Yeah. You're in a lot of committees.
Sure. Natalie, did you want your pad back?